The ocean is as mysterious as it is endless. Beneath its waves lie stories that defy explanation. True stories that will leave you questioning what we really know about the deep. Like underwater ruins, so precise they couldn't possibly be natural. Ships that vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing, not even a whisper of what happened. And submarines that become tombs for their crews. Or so we thought. These aren't legends or myths. They're all real, and they're all unsolved. So get comfortable, grab a snack, and join me as we dive into the unknown. The deeper we go, the stranger it gets. Let's start with a World War II submarine that holds a secret so chilling, it defies all rational explanation. In the depths of the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 3 miles beneath the surface, lies the wreckage of the Japanese Submarine I-52, a vessel with a dark past and an even darker mystery. The I-52 was no ordinary submarine. Built during the height of World War II, it was designed for long-range missions, carrying both military supplies and valuable cargo between Japan and Nazi Germany. On June 23, 1944, while making its secret journey across the Atlantic, the I-52 was detected by American forces. The USS Bogue, an escort carrier, launched an attack that would send the submarine to its final resting place. Depth charges rained down, and the I-52 plunged into the abyss, taking with it 112 crew members and reportedly over 2 tons of gold. For decades, the I-52 remained lost to the depths, its location unknown, its story incomplete. Then, in 1995, a team led by underwater explorer Paul Tidwell finally located the wreck. It was an extraordinary find, one that promised to shed light on a forgotten chapter of naval history. But what they discovered was something far more disturbing. As divers descended to explore the sunken vessel, they expected to find a tomb, the final resting place of the 112 Japanese sailors who had gone down with their ship. The submarine was largely intact, suggesting that it had sunk quickly but remained sealed as it descended into the depths. Under normal circumstances, such conditions would have preserved the remains of those trapped inside. Yet when the exploration team managed to gain access to the submarine's interior, they found something impossible: emptiness. There were no bodies, no skeletal remains, no trace of the 112 souls who had been aboard when the I-52 made its final dive. It was as if the entire crew had simply vanished. This defied all logical explanation. The submarine showed no signs of massive hull breaches that would have allowed the bodies to be swept away. The hatches were sealed. There was no evidence that the crew had attempted to escape. They should have been there, preserved in the cold, oxygen-depleted environment of the deep sea. But they weren't. The mystery deepened as divers continued to explore the wreck. Personal belongings remained untouched. Uniforms hung in lockers. Cups still sat on tables in the mess hall. Everything suggested that the crew had been there one moment and gone the next, leaving behind all physical traces of their existence except for their bodies. Perhaps most disturbing were the reports from several members of the diving team. They described experiencing inexplicable phenomena while exploring the I-52. Some felt as though they were being watched by unseen eyes. Others heard sounds that shouldn't exist, thousands of feet below the surface, whispers, metallic clangs, and in one particularly chilling account, the distinct sound of Japanese voices engaged in muffled conversation. One diver, who asked to remain anonymous, refused to ever return to the site after claiming to have seen a human figure moving through a corridor of the submarine, a figure that vanished when illuminated by his flashlight. Equipment malfunctions became commonplace during dives to the I-52. Lights would flicker or die completely. Communication devices experienced interference, sometimes picking up faint voices speaking in Japanese. Video feeds would distort precisely when directed towards certain areas of the submarine, particularly the crew quarters and command center. Scientists and skeptics have proposed various theories to explain the missing crew. Some suggest that unusual deep-sea currents might have somehow removed the remains through small openings in the hull that expanded as the submarine imploded during its descent. Others point to specialized bacteria that could have accelerated decomposition beyond normal rates. But none of these theories fully explain the complete absence of any human remains. Not a single bone. Not a fragment of clothing that would have contained human DNA. Nothing. The Japanese government has shown surprisingly little interest in the I-52 since its discovery. Official requests for information about the submarine's final mission have been met with vague responses or outright refusal. This has led some to speculate that there might be more to the I-52's story than a simple wartime sinking, perhaps something the authorities prefer to keep buried in the deepest part of the ocean. Today, the I-52 remains where it has lain for over 75 years, a silent metal coffin without bodies, a vessel of war that now carries nothing but questions. Those who have visited the wreck speak of an overwhelming sense of dread that seems to emanate from its rusted hull, as if the submarine itself is aware of its unnatural emptiness. What happened to the crew of the I-52? How could 112 men disappear without a trace from a sealed metal tube 3 miles beneath the ocean's surface? Was it something natural that science has yet to explain, or something far more sinister? The ocean keeps its secrets well, and the case of the I-52 and its vanishing crew remains one of its most disturbing unsolved mysteries. Before we dive into our next maritime mystery, I want to take a quick moment to thank you for joining me on this journey into the unknown depths. If you're enjoying these eerie ocean tales, consider hitting that subscribe button. It's like throwing a lifeline to this channel and helps us continue exploring these dark waters together. Each subscription is like a beacon that guides us toward more mysterious stories waiting to be told. And unlike the crew of the I-52, your support won't vanish without a trace. It makes a real difference. Now, let's continue our descent into the next disturbing ocean enigma that has baffled experts for years. Story 2. The Nameless Drifters of the Pacific. From the haunting emptiness of the I-52 submarine, we now turn to another maritime mystery, one that continues to unfold even today in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. This isn't a story from decades past, but a modern enigma that has left authorities baffled and scientists questioning everything they know about human biology. Since 2010, a disturbing pattern has emerged in a specific region of the Pacific. Bodies, human bodies, have been discovered floating in the water. Not just one or two, which might be explained away as tragic accidents or suicides, but dozens. And these aren't ordinary drowning victims. There's something profoundly wrong about these nameless drifters that defies all scientific explanation. Picture this: a fishing vessel traversing the Pacific waters, somewhere between Japan and Hawaii. The crew is going about their daily routine when someone spots something in the distance. At first, they think it might be debris, perhaps part of the vast field of plastic that unfortunately pollutes our oceans. But as they draw closer, the horrible truth becomes clear. It's a human body, floating face down in the gentle swell. The authorities are contacted, the body is recovered, and that's when things take a turn for the bizarre. The first thing investigators notice is the condition of the remains. These bodies show no signs of decomposition, none. Despite having been in ocean water for what should have been days, weeks, or even months, they appear almost preserved, as if they had entered the water mere hours before discovery. This defies everything we know about what happens to human remains in seawater. Typically, a body in the ocean begins to decompose rapidly. Marine life feeds on the tissue. The salt water accelerates breakdown of the skin. Bloating occurs as gases build up internally, yet these bodies exhibit none of these expected changes. Their skin remains intact, their features recognizable. No evidence of predation by marine life. It's as if the ocean itself has somehow preserved them in a state of eerie suspension. But the mystery doesn't end there. When authorities attempt to identify these individuals, they hit a wall that seems insurmountable. The bodies carry no identification, no distinguishing marks or tattoos that might be traceable. Dental records yield no matches in any international database. Even more disturbing is what happens when DNA samples are processed. The genetic profiles of these nameless drifters don't match anyone in global DNA databases. Not a single relative, not a distant cousin, nothing. It's as if these people never existed in any official capacity. No birth records, no school records, no employment history, no family searching for their missing loved one. They are, in the truest sense of the word, nameless. Dr. Eleanor Ripley, a forensic oceanographer who has examined several of these cases, expresses her bewilderment. In today's connected world, it's virtually impossible for a person to leave no trace of their existence. We all leave digital footprints, paper trails, genetic connections to family members. These individuals have none of that. It's as if they appeared out of nowhere, only to be found floating in the Pacific. The geographic pattern of these discoveries adds another layer to the mystery. All of the bodies have been found within a roughly circular area of the Pacific, approximately 300 miles in diameter. Sailors have begun to refer to this region as the drift, and some vessels now actively avoid it. Those who must pass through report unusual phenomena, compass malfunctions, radio static, and an oppressive sense of being watched. Marine biologists have noted another anomaly. The waters in this region show unusually low levels of marine life activity. It's not quite a dead zone, but there's a noticeable absence of the normal biodiversity one would expect in this part of the Pacific. Fish populations are significantly reduced. Seabird activity is minimal. It's as if something in these waters repels the natural order of the ocean ecosystem. By 2023, the count of these nameless drifters had reached 47. 47 unidentifiable human beings with no past, no identity, and no explanation for their presence in this specific part of the ocean. The latest body was discovered just 3 months ago by the crew of a Japanese research vessel studying ocean currents. Dr. Takashi Nomura, the lead scientist on the expedition, noted something that previous investigators had overlooked. All of the bodies, regardless of apparent age, gender, or ethnicity, had identical microscopic crystalline structures embedded in their skin cells. These structures are not known to occur naturally in the human body and don't match any known medical procedure or environmental exposure. Whatever happened to these people, Dr. Nomura stated in his report, they all experienced the same phenomenon. These crystalline structures seem almost artificial, as if intentionally placed within the cellular structure, but how this was done, or by whom, remains completely unknown. Theories about the nameless drifters range from the plausible to the fantastic. Some suggest they might be victims of human trafficking operations, carefully stripped of identification before disposal. Others propose they could be test subjects from clandestine medical experiments conducted on ships in international waters. The more extreme theories suggest connections to unidentified submarine craft reported in the region, or even the possibility that these bodies somehow manifested through unexplained dimensional phenomena. What makes this mystery particularly disturbing is its ongoing nature. Unlike historical maritime enigmas, this one continues to unfold. New bodies appear with unsettling regularity, approximately one every 3 to 4 months. Each discovery adds to the pattern, while providing no additional answers. International maritime authorities have established a task force to investigate these cases, but after 13 years, they're no closer to understanding who these people are, where they come from, or why they all end up floating in the same region of the Pacific Ocean, preserved in defiance of natural processes. Perhaps most unsettling of all is the question nobody wants to ask. What if these aren't victims at all? What if they're messengers of some kind, deliberately placed in our path by forces we don't yet understand? The nameless drifters of the Pacific remain one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries of our modern oceans. They remind us that for all our technology and scientific advancement, the sea still holds secrets that defy our comprehension, secrets that occasionally wash up to confront us with the limitations of our understanding. As we navigate away from the troubling waters of the drift, we set course for the frigid seas of Antarctica, where another enigma awaits, one that can be heard rather than seen, and which claimed an entire research team who dared to investigate its source. Story 3: The Slowdown Sound and Missing Research Team. The mysteries of the ocean aren't always visible to the eye. Sometimes, they come to us as whispers from the deep, sounds that defy explanation, calls from something ancient and unknowable. In the frigid waters of Antarctica, one such sound emerged, a haunting acoustic anomaly that would be named Slow Down for its distinctive downward frequency sweep. But what began as a scientific curiosity would soon transform into one of the most disturbing, unsolved mysteries of modern maritime research. The story begins in the austral summer of 2016, when underwater microphones operated by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, first picked up the unusual sound. These hydrophones, part of a global network designed to monitor marine mammals and underwater seismic activity, detected something unprecedented: an ultra-low frequency sound that started around 35 Hz and swept downward to about 15 Hz over the course of approximately 7 minutes. This wasn't the first mysterious ocean sound to be recorded. The bloop, the upsweep, and Julia had all been captured by hydrophones in years past. But the slowdown was different. It didn't match the acoustic signature of any known marine mammal, geological process, or human activity. And unlike other unexplained ocean sounds that occurred once and never repeated, the slowdown kept returning, always from the same remote area of the Antarctic Ocean, always with the same eerie descending pattern. Dr. Marcus Lehman, a leading marine acoustics expert with NOAA, described the sound as unlike anything we've ever recorded. It's almost as if something massive is groaning, but slowed down to a pace that suggests a scale beyond our comprehension. By early 2018, the scientific community's curiosity had reached a fever pitch. The slowdown had been recorded with increasing frequency, from once every few months to nearly weekly occurrences. An international research expedition was organized to investigate the source. The team consisted of 12 specialists, acoustics experts, marine biologists, geologists, and even a specialist in cryoacoustics, the study of sounds generated by ice. The research vessel Aurora set sail from Hobart, Tasmania in March 2018, equipped with state-of-the-art sonar equipment, underwater drones, and a specialized array of hydrophones designed to triangulate the exact source of the slowdown. The team was led by Dr. Elena Vasquez, a respected oceanographer with 3 decades of Antarctic research experience. Their journey to the coordinates where the sound had been detected was uneventful. Weather conditions were favorable by Antarctic standards, merely freezing rather than lethally cold, with relatively calm seas. The Aurora reached its destination after 11 days at sea, and the team immediately began deploying their equipment. The first 3 days of research yielded fascinating data. The slowdown sound was recorded with unprecedented clarity, and the team was able to narrow down its origin to an area approximately 2 square kilometers in size. Initial sonar scans revealed a topographical anomaly on the seafloor, what appeared to be a massive crevasse that didn't match existing bathymetric maps of the region. Dr. Vasquez's logs from those initial days expressed growing excitement. "We're on the verge of something significant," she wrote. "The sound appears to be emanating from within the crevasse structure. We'll be deploying the deep-sea ROV tomorrow to get visual confirmation of what we're dealing with." That was the last normal entry in her log. The next day's entry was brief and puzzling. "The sound changed when we approached. It knows we're here." The final communication from the Aurora came 48 hours later, a garbled radio transmission that maritime authorities could only partially decipher. "Dr. Ford?" Vasquez's voice was identified, speaking rapidly about movement below and not what we thought. The transmission ended abruptly with what sounded like multiple voices shouting, followed by a high-pitched tone that damaged the receiving equipment. When the Aurora failed to make its scheduled check-in the following day, a search and rescue operation was launched. An Australian Navy vessel reached the Aurora's last known coordinates 5 days later. What they found has become the stuff of maritime legend. The Aurora was adrift, all systems operational, no signs of damage or struggle, but the entire 12-person research team had vanished without a trace. Their personal belongings remained in their cabins. Half-eaten meals sat on plates in the galley. The ship's small boat remained secured in its davits, unused. The only clue to their fate was found in the research lab. The main hydrophone recording system was still running. The Australian Navy personnel who boarded the vessel described hearing whispering voices coming from the speakers connected to the underwater microphones, voices that didn't belong to any of the missing researchers, speaking in what linguistics experts would later identify as a language that shared structural elements with ancient Sumerian, but was definitely not human in origin. The recording recovered from the Aurora has never been released to the public in its entirety. The 10-minute segment that was shared with other research institutions features the slowdown sound, but altered, interspersed with what sound like words or phrases, rhythmic and deliberate. In the background, almost imperceptible unless the volume is increased significantly, are what sound like human voices crying out in apparent distress. Analysis of these recordings revealed another disturbing detail. Embedded within the audio were infrasonic frequencies, sounds below the range of human hearing that are known to induce feelings of anxiety, dread, and nausea in people exposed to them. These frequencies appeared to be artificially structured, not the result of natural processes. The deep-sea ROV that the team had deployed was recovered, its camera memory intact. The footage shows the vehicle descending toward the crevasse on the ocean floor. As it approaches, the water around it darkens, though the ROV's powerful lights were functioning normally. The last 30 seconds of footage show what appears to be massive movement along the edges of the crevasse, rippling, undulating shapes that marine biologists could not identify as any known species. Then the camera abruptly turns upward, toward the surface, capturing what looks like multiple large forms moving between the ROV and the distant silhouette of the Aurora's hull. The footage ends there. In the 5 years since the disappearance of the Aurora research team, the slowdown sound has continued to be recorded by remote hydrophones. However, its pattern has changed. What was once a simple downward frequency sweep now contains complex variations that acoustic analysts have compared to speech patterns. It's as if the sound is evolving, becoming more articulate. More disturbing still, similar sounds have recently been detected in other deep ocean trenches around the world, off the coast of Japan, in the Puerto Rico Trench, and near the Mariana Trench. Each has the same distinctive downward sweep, but with regional dialects, subtle variations that nevertheless maintain the same basic structure. No further research expeditions have been authorized to investigate the source of the slowdown sound. The coordinates where the Aurora was found have been designated a restricted maritime zone by international agreement. Satellite tracking shows that ships now alter their courses to avoid the area, creating a wide berth around what sailors have begun to call the Whisper Zone. The fate of Dr. Vasquez and her team remains unknown. No bodies have ever been recovered. No distress signals were received beyond that final chaotic transmission. The 12 researchers simply vanished, leaving behind only their equipment, still faithfully recording whatever it is that calls from the Antarctic deep, a call that seems to be growing more complex, more deliberate, and perhaps more urgent with each passing year. As we leave behind the frigid waters where the slowdown sound continues its eerie broadcast, we turn our attention to another ocean mystery, one that combines an inexplicable artifact from the deep with the disappearance of those who ventured too close to its enigmatic presence. Story 4. The Eltanin Antenna and Disappeared Submarines. The ocean floor should be a place of silence and darkness, a vast desert of mud and rock, occasionally interrupted by underwater mountains and trenches. But in 1964, researchers aboard the NSF polar research vessel Eltanin made a discovery that continues to defy explanation, an object that looks so out of place, so deliberate in its construction, that it challenges our understanding of what should exist in the deepest parts of our world's oceans. While dredging the seafloor approximately 1,000 miles west of Cape Horn at a depth of 13,500 feet, the Eltanin's cameras captured images of a peculiar structure rising from the mud. Perfectly symmetrical and clearly manufactured, the object resembled nothing so much as a sophisticated antenna or satellite array. Standing approximately 6 feet tall, it featured evenly spaced arms radiating from a central column, each ending in a bulbous node. The entire structure appeared to be made of metal, though coated with sediment from untold years beneath the waves. Initially, marine biologists suggested it might be an unusually large specimen of a deep-sea sponge, perhaps Cladorhiza concrescens. But further analysis of the photographs revealed mechanical elements inconsistent with any known biological organism, perfect right angles, evenly spaced components, and what appeared to be a metallic luster where sediment had fallen away. Dr. Thomas Pawlowski, who studied the original photographs extensively in the 1980s, stated, "Whatever this object is, it appears to have been deliberately placed. The seabed around it shows signs of having been disturbed in a radial pattern, as if the object was inserted into the mud with some force. This is not consistent with natural deposition or with known deep-sea biological structures." The location of the Eltanin antenna, as it came to be known, was precisely logged. Yet strangely, subsequent expeditions to relocate and possibly retrieve the object were unsuccessful. It was as if the antenna had somehow shifted position or disappeared entirely. Interest in the artifact might have faded into the realm of obscure oceanographic curiosities, if not for what happened in the decades that followed. Beginning in the 1980s, the waters surrounding the antenna's recorded location became associated with another disturbing phenomenon, the unexplained disappearance of submarines. The first incident occurred in 1983, when a Soviet Foxtrot-class submarine on a routine patrol mission in the South Pacific ceased all communications. The Soviet Navy conducted an extensive search but found no wreckage, no oil slick, nothing to indicate what had happened to the vessel and its crew of 78 men. The incident was classified and remained largely unknown to the Western world until the fall of the Soviet Union, when partial records were declassified. These records revealed something chilling. The submarine's last reported position was approximately 80 nautical miles from where the Eltanin antenna had been photographed 2 decades earlier. In 1997, a Chilean naval submarine, the Simpson, disappeared during training exercises. Again, no distress call was received, and no debris was ever found despite an extensive international search effort. The Chilean Navy's classified report, portions of which were leaked in 2010, indicated that the Simpson's planned route would have taken it within 120 nautical miles of the antenna's location. The third disappearance occurred in 2018, when an unmanned research submarine operated by a private oceanographic company lost contact with its support vessel. Unlike the previous incidents, this submersible was equipped with modern tracking technology and automatic emergency protocols designed to bring it to the surface in the event of a malfunction. None of these systems activated. The submersible, along with its valuable scientific equipment and recorded data, simply vanished. Its last recorded position, 42 nautical miles from the Eltanin antenna site. 3 submarines, spanning decades and representing different nations and technologies, all disappearing without trace in the same region of the South Pacific. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence, too disturbing to ignore. In 2019, a joint research initiative between Chile and the United States deployed a series of specialized audio recording devices in a grid pattern around the antenna's original coordinates. The purpose was to monitor all acoustic activity in the region, both natural sounds like whale calls and the mechanical noises of passing vessels. The devices were designed to operate autonomously for 1 year before being retrieved. When the research team returned to collect their equipment in early 2020, they found that several of the devices had captured something extraordinary. At irregular intervals, but typically during periods of heightened seismic activity in the region, the recorders had picked up a series of rhythmic pulses. These sounds followed patterns reminiscent of Morse code, but conforming to no known international signal protocol. Dr. Miranda Chen, the acoustic specialist who analyzed the recordings, described them as deliberately structured communications. These are not random sounds or the result of equipment malfunction. There's a mathematical precision to them that suggests an intelligent origin. More disturbing was her next observation. The signal patterns changed after we deployed our equipment. It's as if whatever was generating these sounds became aware that it was being monitored and altered its communication method in response. The implications were unsettling. If the sounds were artificial in origin, who or what was creating them? And what connection might they have to the antenna and the disappeared submarines? Underwater microphones deployed in subsequent monitoring missions captured additional signals, but with a troubling new development. Interspersed with the rhythmic pulses were longer sequences that acoustic analysis identified as having the same structural patterns as human speech, specifically snippets that matched voice patterns of known crew members from the missing submarines. It was as if something was replaying fragments of their final communications, or perhaps more disturbing still, as if the missing crew members were somehow still present in some capacity near the antenna site. The Chilean Navy has since established a permanent exclusion zone around the coordinates, forbidding all vessels from entering a 200-mile radius. Official statements cite unpredictable underwater currents and seismic instability as the reason for this restriction. Those familiar with the classified research tell a different story. A former Chilean naval intelligence officer, speaking on condition of anonymity, stated, "Whatever is down there, it's not just some relic or natural formation. It's active. It responds to our presence, and it has already taken 3 submarines. We're dealing with something that operates according to rules we don't understand, and that makes it potentially more dangerous than any conventional threat." In 2022, satellite imagery revealed something else: periodic disturbances in the ocean surface above the antenna's location. These disturbances aren't consistent with normal wave patterns or known oceanographic phenomena. They appear as perfect circles of unusually calm water, as if something beneath the surface is affecting the water's natural movement. Most recently, oceanographers have detected unusual electromagnetic readings emanating from the region. These signals appear at the same time as the acoustic pulses and follow similar patterns. Some researchers have suggested that the antenna might actually be what its name implies, a communication device of some kind, transmitting to somewhere. The questions surrounding the Eltanin antenna and the disappeared submarines continue to multiply. What is this strange object on the ocean floor? Is it ancient or modern, terrestrial or something else? And what happened to the 3 submarines and their crews who ventured too close to its mysterious presence? As with so many ocean mysteries, we are left with more questions than answers, more shadows than light. The seafloor west of Cape Horn continues to broadcast its cryptic signals, while naval vessels carefully skirt its boundaries, unwilling to risk becoming the next chapter in its unsettling story. Let's now navigate away from the mysterious antenna and its vanished visitors, turning our attention to another disturbing oceanic enigma, one where the water itself seems to breed monstrosities that should not exist. Story 5. Outer Silver, Pit Dead Zone, and Mutated Marine Life. From mysterious objects on the ocean floor, we now turn to a place where the water itself seems wrong, a region where the boundary between natural and unnatural has blurred, giving rise to creatures that defy the fundamental laws of biology. Welcome to the Outer Silver Pit, a seemingly unremarkable depression in the North Sea that has become the epicenter of one of the most disturbing oceanic phenomena of the 21st century. Located approximately 100 miles east of the British coastline, the Outer Silver Pit is a glacial trench that plunges to depths of around 100 meters in an otherwise shallow sea. For centuries, it has been a productive fishing ground, its deeper, cooler waters attracting abundant marine life. Dutch, British, and Danish fishing vessels have harvested its bounty since the Middle Ages, finding nothing unusual about this particular patch of sea. That began to change in the winter of 2008. Martin Holgersen, captain of the Danish fishing trawler Nordlys, pulled up nets filled with fish so grotesquely deformed that his crew initially refused to touch them. Cod with multiple heads, flatfish with eyes clustered in tumorous growths along their spines, crabs with shells that seemed to be melting, revealing pulsing organs beneath. In 40 years at sea, I have never seen anything like it, Holgersen later told Danish maritime authorities. These weren't isolated specimens. Nearly everything in the nets was wrong somehow. It was as if the very concept of what these creatures should be had become corrupted. The Nordlys incident might have been dismissed as an anomaly if not for what happened next. Within 6 months, 5 other fishing vessels reported similar catches from the Outer Silver Pit. Photographs began to circulate among fishing communities, showing marine life distorted in ways that marine biologists struggled to explain. Dr. Elise Johansen of the University of Copenhagen was among the first scientists to examine specimens from the region. Her initial findings were troubling. These aren't simple deformities or tumors. In many cases, we're seeing fundamental alterations to developmental pathways that should be evolutionarily stable. It's as if something is rewriting the genetic instructions of these organisms at a basic level. By 2010, the anomalies had caught the attention of environmental agencies across Europe. Initial suspicions focused on chemical contamination, perhaps from sunken vessels carrying toxic materials or undocumented underwater dumping of industrial waste. The British Royal Navy conducted a thorough survey of the seabed, but found no evidence of shipwrecks or dump sites that could account for the mutations. What they did discover was something else entirely. A circular area approximately 12 kilometers in diameter, where the water column exhibited unusual properties. Salinity, temperature, and oxygen levels all fell within normal parameters, but sophisticated analysis revealed the presence of something unprecedented: microscopic particles suspended throughout the water that didn't match any known, natural, or man-made substance. Dr. Julian Marsh, a marine biochemist who participated in the follow-up research, described these particles as neither fully organic nor inorganic. They exhibit properties of both living cells and crystalline structures, forming and dissolving in patterns that suggest some form of organized behavior. More disturbing still was the discovery of an unknown bacterium present throughout the affected zone. This microorganism, temporarily designated BSP-1, Bacterium silver pit 1, possessed a molecular structure unlike anything in scientific records. Its DNA, if it could even be called that, utilized nucleotide arrangements that shouldn't be biologically viable. This isn't something that evolved on Earth, Dr. Marsh stated in a private communication later leaked to scientific journals, at least not through any evolutionary pathway we understand. It's as if someone took the fundamental building blocks of life and reassembled them according to a completely different set of rules. By 2013, vessels had begun reporting equipment malfunctions while passing through the area. Navigation systems displayed erratic readings. Radio communications became garbled or failed entirely. In several cases, engines inexplicably shut down, leaving ships drifting until they cleared the boundaries of what mariners now called the wrong water. The fishing vessel Stellaris experienced the most severe incident in August 2014. After 2 hours of engine failure within the zone, they reported bizarre phenomena. Seawater taken from over the side appeared to move with purpose when collected in containers, forming geometric patterns before settling. Metal objects left in contact with this water began to corrode in unusual patterns, with the corrosion spreading in spiral formations. Most alarmingly, 3 crew members who had direct skin contact with water from the zone developed unusual symptoms within 48 hours. Their skin exhibited bioluminescent properties in darkness. They reported vivid, identical nightmares featuring underwater structures that breathed. All 3 developed unusual growths along their lymphatic pathways that medical specialists were unable to classify as either cancerous or infectious. Government response to the outer silver pit phenomenon has evolved from curiosity to concern to what appears to be carefully managed containment. The zone has been officially designated a marine hazard area and is marked on all navigational charts. Commercial fishing is prohibited, and vessel transit is discouraged through a system of escalating warnings. What the public hasn't been told is that the affected zone appears to be growing. Satellite imagery analyzed by independent researchers shows that the circular region has expanded from its original 12-kilometer diameter to nearly 17 kilometers as of early 2023. The expansion isn't uniform. The zone extends in irregular pulses, reaching outward like tendrils before filling in the gaps between these extensions. In 2019, a research vessel equipped with a specialized containment laboratory was commissioned by a joint European Union task force to conduct a comprehensive study of the zone. The research vessel Challenger spent 3 weeks collecting samples and conducting tests from the periphery of the affected area, gradually working toward its center. The published results of this expedition were heavily redacted, with entire sections of data classified under national security protocols. What has emerged through anonymous sources and leaked documents paints a disturbing picture. At the center of the outer silver pit zone, the research team reportedly discovered what they described as an environmental impossibility, a column of seawater approximately 200 meters in diameter that doesn't mix with the surrounding ocean. This water exhibits different refractive properties, appearing darker and somehow more dense than normal seawater, yet objects neither float nor sink differently within it. Core samples taken from the seabed beneath this column revealed another anomaly. Instead of the expected glacial clay and marine sediments, the drills brought up a previously unknown type of organic matter, a dense, fibrous substance that lab technicians initially mistook for a form of coral or fungal growth. Microscopic examination revealed something far more unsettling. The material was composed of cells that appeared to be in a continuous state of transformation, neither fully differentiating nor dying, locked in an endless process of becoming. Dr. Sarah Lindholm, a marine geneticist who examined tissue samples from mutated fish caught near the zone, made perhaps the most chilling discovery. The mutations weren't random. Across different species, the genetic modifications followed specific patterns that, when mapped and analyzed, resembled engineered code rather than the typical random errors seen in radiation-induced or chemical mutations. Whatever is causing these changes, Dr. Lindholm noted in a private research journal obtained by investigators, appears to be rewriting these organisms according to a predetermined template. It's as if an intelligence is conducting a large-scale biological experiment, testing different variations to see which adaptations succeed. The most recent development came in January 2023, when automated underwater monitoring stations detected unusual seismic activity at the center of the zone. These weren't normal earthquake patterns, but rhythmic vibrations that maintained a consistent frequency for over 72 hours. Analysis revealed these vibrations fell within the range known to influence neural activity in multiple marine species, potentially affecting behavior and even developmental pathways. Perhaps most disturbing are the reports from fishermen operating just outside the exclusion zone. They describe witnessing schools of fish moving in unnaturally coordinated patterns, forming geometric shapes underwater before dispersing. Several have captured footage of different marine species, normally predator and prey, swimming together in these formations, as if responding to a common influence. One Danish trawler that accidentally strayed into the outer boundary of the zone in November 2022 reported a mass of creatures rising from the depths, a swirling column of fish, cephalopods, and crustaceans moving as a single organism. The captain described it as a tower of flesh assembled from 1,000 different species, rising toward the surface before collapsing back into individual creatures. The crew's cell phones, cameras, and the ship's own recording equipment all failed simultaneously during this event. Only the captain's written log and the testimony of the visibly shaken crew remain as evidence. The bacterium found in the waters of the outer silver pit remains an evolutionary and biochemical impossibility. Laboratory attempts to study it have been largely unsuccessful, as the microorganism appears to alter its structure when removed from the zone, eventually degrading into inert organic material. The brief glimpses scientists have managed to capture suggest a level of complexity that exceeds known bacterial life. Internal structures that resemble simplified organs and molecular mechanisms that cannot be classified within the standard tree of life. What exactly is happening in the outer silver pit? Is it the result of some undiscovered natural process, a man-made contamination with unforeseen consequences, or something more sinister? If the mutations and anomalies are indeed the product of an intelligence, what is its purpose? And perhaps most urgently, what will happen if the zone continues to expand, potentially reaching coastal waters? As monitoring continues and the exclusion zone grows larger on maritime charts, the waters of the North Sea keep their disturbing secret, a spreading stain of biological impossibility where the fundamental rules of life itself seem to have been rewritten by an unseen hand. Story 6. Kosrae Cave of Whispers. From the disturbing biological transformations of the outer silver pit, we now turn our attention to a place where the boundary between past and present, life and death, seems as fluid as the waters that shroud it. Off the coast of Kosrae, a remote island in Micronesia, lies an underwater cave system that holds a mystery so unsettling that even seasoned divers speak of it in hushed tones. Kosrae itself is a place of ancient secrets. Rising dramatically from the Pacific Ocean, its lush mountains and pristine reefs have been home to indigenous Micronesians for thousands of years. Local legends speak of a time when the island was the center of a vast maritime empire, its harbors filled with vessels from distant lands, its temples the seat of powerful sorcerer kings who commanded the forces of nature. Today, the island is known primarily for its spectacular diving sites, including a network of underwater caves along its eastern coast. These caves, formed over millennia by the relentless action of waves against volcanic rock, create a labyrinth of passages, chambers, and hidden recesses beneath the island's shores. It was within this underwater maze that the first strange encounters were reported. In 1998, an American diving instructor named Michael Ramirez was guiding a small group through the largest and most accessible of these caves when he heard what he initially thought was one of his clients calling for help. He quickly realized that all members of his party were accounted for and within visual range. Yet the voice persisted, faint, distant, and speaking in a language he couldn't identify. It wasn't just a trick of the currents or water moving through tight spaces, Ramirez later wrote in a diving magazine. This was clearly a human voice, calling out with urgency. But we were the only divers in the system that day, and the voice seemed to be coming from a passage that was too narrow for any diver to access. Ramirez dismissed the experience as an auditory hallucination, perhaps induced by nitrogen narcosis, a well-documented altered state of consciousness that can affect divers at depth. But when he returned to the same cave system 2 weeks later with a different group, the experience was repeated. This time, multiple members of the party reported hearing voices. Over the next decade, similar reports accumulated. Divers described hearing whispers, calls, and even chanting coming from the deepest recesses of the cave system. Local Micronesian guides were unsurprised by these accounts. They had long avoided certain parts of the underwater caves, believing them to be dwelling places of the ancestors, where the voices of the dead could sometimes be heard by the living. The scientific community remained skeptical until 2012, when a team from the University of Hawaii's Marine Archaeology Department conducted a survey of the cave system. Their primary goal was to document several ancient shipwrecks that had been discovered nearby, vessels dating from the 16th to 19th centuries that had run afoul of Kosrae's treacherous reefs. The team brought sophisticated underwater recording equipment to document their exploration. What they captured changed everything. Dr. Elena Kawamoto, the lead archaeologist, described their discovery. "We were setting up acoustic monitoring equipment in the main chamber of what the locals call Wia Kula, the Cave of Whispers. Initially, we were recording ambient sounds to serve as a baseline for our work. When we reviewed the recordings later that evening, we were stunned. Clear vocal sounds were present on the recording. Multiple voices speaking or chanting in what linguistic experts would later identify as containing elements of ancient Micronesian dialects, Spanish, and several unidentified languages. What made this discovery particularly extraordinary was that the research team had conducted the recording during a period when no divers were present in the system. The cave had been empty save for their fixed recording equipment. Follow-up investigations yielded even more disturbing results. The research team placed sealed, waterproof cameras and additional recording devices throughout the cave system. The footage showed nothing unusual, just the empty, silent chambers of the underwater caves. But the audio told a different story. Voices, dozens of them, could be heard on the recordings. They spoke in multiple languages, some recognizable, others unknown to modern linguistics. Most disturbing were the emotional qualities of these voices. They ranged from calm conversation to desperate pleas, from angry shouting to what sounded like ritualistic chanting. When the recordings were analyzed by linguistic experts, they made a chilling discovery. Some of the identifiable language fragments matched historical periods corresponding exactly with known shipwrecks around Kosrae. 16th century Spanish matched with the wreck of a Manila galleon. 18th century English aligned with a documented British merchant vessel lost in 1788. Even fragments of Japanese military terminology from the World War II era corresponded to a submarine that had disappeared in the region in 1944. It was as if the cave was somehow preserving, or perhaps replaying, the voices of those who had perished in the waters surrounding the island across centuries of maritime history. In 2015, the phenomenon took an even more unsettling turn. A team of technical divers exploring a previously unmapped section of the cave system reported hearing a voice calling specifically to them, addressing one diver by name and speaking in perfect modern English. The voice directed them to a narrow fissure they had overlooked, which led to a chamber containing the remarkably preserved remains of a wooden vessel, later identified as a 19th century whaling boat. The implications were staggering. Whatever was generating these voices wasn't simply replaying the past. It appeared to be interactive, responsive to the presence of modern visitors. Dr. Kawamoto's team returned with more sophisticated equipment, including underwater speakers that could broadcast pre-recorded messages into the cave system. What happened next defied rational explanation. When they played questions in various languages, the recording devices captured what appeared to be direct responses, not echoes or distortions of their broadcasts, but unique statements that directly addressed their queries. When asked in 18th century Spanish who was speaking, a voice responded in the same dialect, those who were taken by the sea but not claimed by death. When asked in modern Japanese what they wanted, multiple voices replied in various languages, their words overlapping but conveying the same essential message: recognition, remembrance, release. By 2018, the phenomenon had attracted the attention of researchers from diverse fields: marine archaeology, acoustics, linguistics, and even parapsychology. Various theories were proposed to explain the voices. Some suggested an unprecedented form of acoustic phenomenon, perhaps the unique geology of the cave somehow recorded and later played back sounds from the past, like a natural version of a phonograph. Others proposed that the extreme isolation and unusual electromagnetic properties of the cave system, the local volcanic rock, contains high levels of magnetite, might be enabling some form of consciousness to persist after death, a scientifically heretical but difficult to dismiss hypothesis given the evidence. A third theory suggested that the caves might be acting as a focal point for what quantum physicists call non-local consciousness, allowing information and even awareness to manifest across normally impermeable boundaries of time and space. Whatever the explanation, the effects on those who experienced the phenomenon firsthand were profound. Multiple divers reported emerging from the caves with knowledge they couldn't possibly have acquired through normal means, details about historical events, technical information about ancient vessels, even personal details about long-dead sailors that were later verified through historical records. In 2020, an incident occurred that led to the temporary closure of the entire cave system. A solo diver from Australia, despite warnings against entering the caves alone, spent nearly 3 hours in the deepest chamber. When he finally emerged, witnesses described him as transformed. He spoke fluently in languages he had never studied, including 17th century Portuguese and an ancient Micronesian dialect that has had no native speakers for over 400 years. He recounted in vivid detail the final moments of ships that had sunk centuries ago, describing crew members by name and the exact circumstances of their demise. Most disturbing of all, he insisted that he had made a promise to those who dwell in the cave, that he would help them complete their journey. 3 days later, despite being under observation at a local medical facility, he disappeared. His personal belongings were found neatly arranged on the beach near the entrance to the cave system. He was never seen again. The Kosraean government has since implemented strict regulations on who may enter the caves and under what circumstances. Scientific research continues under carefully controlled conditions, but recreational diving in certain chambers is now prohibited entirely. Local authorities, deeply respectful of their cultural traditions regarding ancestral spirits, have conducted traditional ceremonies at the cave entrances, seeking to honor and potentially release whatever presence might dwell within. Despite these precautions, the voices continue. Automated recording equipment still captures their whispers, calls, and pleas. Linguistic analysis has identified fragments of over 40 distinct languages and dialects spanning more than 500 years of human history, all from those who met their fate in the waters surrounding this remote Pacific island. Perhaps most unsettling is what happens when the recordings are played for native speakers of the identified languages. Without exception, they report that the voices are describing the same thing: a transition between states of being, a liminal space between life and death, and the profound loneliness of being remembered only by the sea. The Cave of Whispers remains one of the ocean's most unsettling mysteries, a place where the drowned voices of centuries continue to speak, reminding us that beneath the waves, the normal boundaries of existence may be more permeable than we dare to imagine. As we leave the haunting echoes of Kosrae behind, we turn our attention to another maritime enigma, a ghost ship whose final voyage was documented in increasingly disturbing entries by its captain, leading to one of the most baffling vessel abandonments in modern history. Story 7. The High Aim 6 and the Captain's Log. From the eerie voices of the long-drowned in Kosrae's underwater caves, we navigate to a modern maritime mystery that unfolded in the open waters of the Pacific. A ghost ship discovered adrift with no living soul aboard, yet in perfect working condition. This is the disturbing tale of the High Aim 6, a Taiwanese fishing vessel whose abandonment in 2003 continues to baffle investigators and maritime experts to this day. The story begins on November 12, 2002, when the High Aim 6 departed from the port of Luqiu in Taiwan. It was a routine fishing expedition with a seasoned crew of 13 men, mostly Taiwanese and Indonesian nationals. The captain, Lin Chengqiu, was a veteran of Pacific waters with over 30 years of experience. Nothing about the vessel, its crew, or its mission suggested anything out of the ordinary. For several weeks, the High Aim 6 maintained normal radio contact with its owners, reporting good weather and successful fishing. The last routine communication came on December 13, 2002, with the captain reporting their position and confirming that everything was proceeding as planned. Then, silence. The owners attempted to re-establish contact but received no response. Given the remote areas where fishing vessels often operate, such temporary communication gaps weren't unusual. But as days turned into weeks with no word from the High Aim 6, concern grew. On January 8, 2003, nearly a month after the last communication, the High Aim 6 was spotted drifting in Australian waters, approximately 180 miles northwest of Rowley Shoals off the coast of Western Australia. When the Australian Coast Guard intercepted the vessel, they found a scene that defied logical explanation. The High Aim 6 was in perfect working condition. Its engine functioned normally. There was ample fuel. The navigational equipment was operational. The radio worked. There was sufficient food and fresh water on board. Weather reports for the vessel's path showed no significant storms or hazardous conditions that might have forced an emergency evacuation. Yet the entire crew, all 13 men, had vanished without a trace. There were no signs of struggle or violence. No blood, no damage to the vessel. The ship's small boat remained attached. Personal belongings, including wallets with money and identification, remained in the crew's quarters. It was as if the 13 men had simply evaporated into thin air, leaving the ship to drift aimlessly across the Pacific. Australian authorities boarded the vessel and conducted a thorough investigation. They found the fishing equipment in good order, with a substantial catch of tuna still in the hold, valuable cargo that no crew would willingly abandon. The ship's log contained entries up to December 13th, the date of the last radio communication, with nothing unusual noted. But then the investigators discovered something else, a personal journal belonging to Captain Lin, hidden in his private quarters. What they found within its pages transformed the mystery from merely puzzling to deeply disturbing. The journal started routinely enough, with daily notations about weather conditions, fishing locations, and crew morale. But beginning on December 14th, the day after the last official communication, the entries took a dark turn. "Something is following us," read the entry for December 14th. "Dark shapes beneath the hull, too large for sharks, moving too intelligently for natural creatures." The December 15th entry was longer, more detailed. 3 crew members reported hearing sounds from beneath the boat last night, like metal being struck, or something solid tapping on the hull. "When we shined lights into the water, the shapes retreated but didn't leave. They're staying just at the edge of visibility, watching us." By December 17th, the captain's handwriting had begun to change, becoming more erratic. "It's not just sounds now, voices, coming through the hull, speaking in languages none of us recognize. Chen thinks it's just water against the metal, but I know the difference. These are words, they're calling to us." The entry for December 19th contained a crude drawing, a series of elongated shapes beneath a representation of the vessel. The accompanying text read, "They're becoming bolder, visible even in daylight now. Not fish, not whales, not anything I've seen in 30 years at sea. They seem to change shape as they move. The men are frightened. So am I." On December 21st, the captain wrote, "Lost 2 fish from the lines today. Cut clean, not torn. When we pulled up the 3rd hook, something had twisted the steel as if it were wire. Whatever is down there has strength beyond anything natural." The December 23rd entry was brief but chilling. "They're speaking in Indonesian now. Leon heard his name called from the water. He's refusing to take his watch. Can't say I blame him." The entries for December 24th through 27th were missing, several pages apparently torn from the journal. When the record resumed on December 28th, both the handwriting and content had changed dramatically. The precise, neat script of Captain Lin had been replaced by something more angular, hurried, and less controlled. "They want me to write this down, to make a record. They promise we won't be harmed if I comply. They say they've been searching for a suitable vessel, for a suitable crew. They say we're perfect. They say we'll be together with them soon." The final entry, dated December 31st, contained no normal text at all, just a series of strange symbols unlike any known writing system, covering 3 full pages. These symbols weren't random scribbles or the product of a deranged mind. They followed distinct patterns that suggested linguistic structure. Linguistic experts who later examined these pages described them as exhibiting the mathematical properties of true language, but unrelated to any known human writing system. After these symbol-filled pages, the journal ended. Whatever happened to the High Aim 6 and its crew after December 31st remains unknown. Australian investigators pursued various conventional theories. Perhaps the crew had mutinied and fled in another vessel that rendezvoused with the High Aim 6. Perhaps they had been the victims of pirates who, for some reason, left the valuable vessel and its cargo intact. Perhaps they had abandoned ship due to some dispute or emergency not evident from the physical evidence. None of these theories adequately explained the captain's journal or the complete absence of any trace of 13 men. The investigation took an unexpected turn in April 2003 when one crew member, Burmese engineer Perma, was found alive in Indonesia. He claimed that the ship's fate had been simple. The crew had murdered the captain and his son, who served as chief engineer, following a dispute, then fled the vessel. The Indonesian crew members had returned to their home villages while he had made his way back to Myanmar. This explanation was hastily accepted by some officials eager to close the case with a rational solution. But numerous inconsistencies immediately presented themselves. If the crew had murdered the captain and fled, why was there no blood or signs of violence on the vessel? Why would they leave behind their personal belongings, including money and identification? Why abandon a perfectly functional ship with valuable cargo? How had they left the vessel when the ship's boat was still attached? Most significantly, how could Perma explain the captain's journal with its increasingly disturbing entries? When presented with the journal, Perma reportedly became agitated and refused to discuss it further. Shortly after providing his statement, Perma disappeared. Indonesian authorities claimed he had been released due to lack of evidence, but no further trace of him has ever been found. The Hi-6 case officially remains classified as an act of maritime homicide and abandonment, but many who investigated the vessel firsthand remain unconvinced by this explanation. Dr. Heather Mackenzie, a marine psychologist who consulted on the case, noted, "The journal entries suggest a progression of shared delusion or hallucinatory experience affecting multiple crew members over time. This pattern is inconsistent with both typical maritime psychology and with known cases of crew violence. Something happened on that vessel that goes beyond conventional explanation." Adding another layer to the mystery, 2 other fishing vessels that had been operating in the same region as the Hi-6 during December 2002 also reported unusual experiences, unexplained sonar contacts, electronic equipment malfunctions, and crew members hearing voices or sounds coming from beneath their hulls. Both vessels abandoned their fishing activities and returned to port earlier than planned. Today, the ultimate fate of the Hi-6 crew remains unsolved. The vessel itself, after being thoroughly examined by Australian authorities, was eventually scuttled in deep water off the western Australian coast. As one investigator reportedly remarked, "Some ships carry too much darkness to be allowed to sail again." The captain's journal, with its progression from rational observation to apparent madness to that final cryptic script, remains in a secured evidence facility in Canberra. Researchers who have studied the unknown symbols continue to debate their origin and meaning. Some have noted disturbing similarities to ancient script fragments found on certain Pacific islands, particularly those associated with cults worshipping entities said to dwell in the ocean depths. Whatever truly happened aboard the Hi-6 during those final weeks of 2002, one thing is certain: somewhere in the vast Pacific, 13 men encountered something that caused them to vanish without a trace, leaving behind only a journal documenting their gradual realization that they were not alone in the deep waters, and that whatever was with them had plans of its own. As we leave behind the haunting mystery of the Hi-6, we turn our attention to a different kind of oceanic anomaly. Not a ghost ship, but a phenomenon that seems to defy the natural laws of hydrodynamics, creating vortices of inexplicable darkness that consume whatever crosses their path. Story 8. New England Black Whirlpools. From the enigmatic disappearance of the Hi-6 crew, we now turn to a phenomenon that challenges our understanding of oceanic physics. A series of anomalous vortices that have been terrorizing the waters off the New England coast for decades. Unlike ordinary whirlpools, which form from conflicting currents and eventually dissipate, these disturbances exhibit properties that defy conventional explanation. The waters off the New England coast have always been treacherous. The meeting of the warm Gulf Stream with the cold Labrador Current creates unpredictable conditions, while rugged underwater topography generates complex tidal patterns that have claimed countless vessels throughout maritime history. But beginning in the late 1970s, local fishermen began reporting something different, something that couldn't be explained by normal oceanic behavior. They called them black whirlpools, circular vortices that appeared suddenly in otherwise calm waters, distinguished by their unnaturally dark coloration and perfect geometrical symmetry. Unlike typical whirlpools, which appear as gradually deepening depressions with turbulent, frothy centers, these formations exhibited sharp boundaries between the normal sea and the rotating dark water, as if someone had cut a perfect circle from the ocean's surface and filled it with ink. Joseph Harker, a cod fisherman from Gloucester, Massachusetts, provided one of the earliest documented encounters in September 1978. While fishing approximately 20 miles offshore, Harker witnessed what he initially mistook for an oil slick, a circular patch of black water approximately 30 feet in diameter. As his vessel approached, the slick began to rotate, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. "It wasn't like any whirlpool I've ever seen," Harker wrote in his report to the Coast Guard. "There was no gradual depression leading to a center. It was flat black water spinning like a record, with a perfect circular edge. When I threw a wooden buoy toward it to gauge the current, the buoy stopped dead at the edge for a moment, as if hitting an invisible wall, then suddenly shot toward the center and disappeared. It didn't float back up." Harker's account might have been dismissed as a curious anomaly, if not for similar reports that followed. Throughout the 1980s, at least 17 separate incidents were documented by vessels operating in the Gulf of Maine and the waters east of Cape Cod. In each case, the descriptions matched with remarkable consistency. Perfect circular formations of black water, appearing without warning, rotating with unnatural precision, and disappearing anything that entered their boundaries. The scientific community initially responded with skepticism. Oceanographers suggested the phenomena might be explained by unusual upwellings of cold, sediment-rich water from the seafloor, perhaps triggered by localized seismic activity. Others proposed that decomposing organic matter might be creating pockets of hydrogen sulfide gas, which can darken water and create circular patterns as it rises to the surface. These explanations failed to account for the most disturbing aspects of the black whirlpools: their apparent consumption of objects, and, in several documented cases, living creatures. In July 1985, the research vessel Oceanic, operated by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, became the first scientific vessel to document one of these anomalies. Marine biologist Dr. Eliza Carver was conducting a survey of planktonic distribution when the ship encountered a black whirlpool approximately 50 feet in diameter. Following proper scientific protocol, the crew deployed a series of instruments to measure the phenomenon's properties. Temperature probes revealed that the water within the vortex was approximately 30 degrees Fahrenheit colder than the surrounding ocean, a temperature differential that should have been physically impossible given the depth and conditions. Water samples collected from the periphery showed elevated levels of an unidentified organic compound that later analysis could not match to any known marine biochemical process. Most significant was what happened to the sampling equipment. A weighted collection device lowered into the center of the vortex disappeared completely. The steel cable to which it was attached appeared to have been sheared clean at exactly the boundary of the black water. When the ship deployed a remote submersible equipped with cameras and lights, the video feed showed the device approaching the underside of the whirlpool, where the black water extended downward in a perfect cylinder. As the submersible crossed the boundary, the video feed immediately cut out. When the recovery cable was retracted, it came back empty. The $1.2 million submersible had vanished without a trace. It wasn't just that the equipment disappeared, Dr. Carver noted in her official report. It's that there was no resistance, no tension on the cable as it happened. It was as if the submersible entered another medium entirely, one that offered no resistance whatsoever. The Oceanic's encounter marked a turning point in how these phenomena were perceived by the scientific community. What had once been dismissed as fishermen's tales was now documented with sophisticated instrumentation. The black whirlpools became the subject of serious, if discreet, scientific inquiry. Between 1985 and 1997, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, documented 23 additional appearances of black whirlpools in New England waters. Their investigations revealed several consistent properties. First, the vortices always maintained perfect circular symmetry, regardless of surrounding current conditions. Second, they rotated at a constant rate that did not accelerate or decelerate before disappearance. Third, they exhibited boundaries that appeared to separate normal seawater from a substance that, while appearing to be fluid, had significantly different physical properties. Fourth, objects that entered the vortices never reappeared, nor did they wash up on shore in subsequent days or weeks. Fifth, each appearance lasted between 17 and 23 minutes before the vortex would suddenly collapse, leaving no trace of its presence. Perhaps most disturbing were the acoustic properties of the black whirlpools. In 1992, a NOAA research vessel equipped with hydrophones recorded audio during an encounter approximately 30 miles east of Nantucket. The recordings captured what multiple independent analysts described as vocalizations emanating from within the vortex. These sounds followed patterns inconsistent with any known marine mammal or natural acoustic phenomenon. They contained frequency modulations and rhythmic structures that several linguists identified as sharing characteristics with language, specifically, patterns indicating semantic content rather than random noise. More chilling were the subjective reports from crews who had observed the vortices firsthand. Multiple witnesses described hearing what sounded like screaming or wailing coming from within the black water, sounds that were audible even over the noise of ship engines and without audio equipment. Several observers reported the unsettling impression that these sounds conveyed emotions, specifically expressions of either extreme pain or ecstasy, depending on the interpreter. Captain Morgan Blackwood of the fishing vessel Northern Star provided one of the most detailed accounts after his ship nearly collided with a black whirlpool in October 2003. It opened up less than 100 yards off our starboard bow, just appeared, like someone had punched a hole in the ocean. Perfect circle, maybe 60 feet across, spinning counterclockwise. The water wasn't just dark, it was absence, like looking into nothing. We cut engines immediately and drifted, watching it. That's when we heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind in the rigging, but there was barely a breeze. It was coming from the circle, this sound like dozens of voices all crying out at once, but distorted, stretched out. 2 of my crew became physically ill from listening to it. After about 20 minutes, it just collapsed in on itself and was gone. The water where it had been was completely normal, same temperature, same salinity, nothing to indicate what we'd seen was ever there. Following a series of incidents in 2004 to 2005 that resulted in the disappearance of 2 small fishing vessels and a recreational sailboat, with a total of 11 people lost, the Coast Guard established designated caution zones in areas where the vortices had most frequently been observed. Vessels were advised to report any sightings immediately and to maintain a safe distance from any observed anomalies. The frequency of reported black whirlpools decreased significantly between 2006 and 2015, leading some researchers to speculate that the phenomenon might have been a temporary oceanic anomaly that had run its course. This period of relative calm ended dramatically in August 2016. On the morning of August 12th, the cruise ship Atlantic Explorer, carrying 347 passengers and 215 crew members, reported encountering an unusually large black whirlpool approximately 40 miles southeast of Martha's Vineyard. Captain Reynaldo Merced described a vortex nearly 300 feet in diameter, significantly larger than any previously documented occurrence. As the ship altered course to avoid the phenomenon, passengers gathered along the railings to observe the anomaly. Multiple witnesses recorded video footage that showed the perfectly circular formation of black water rotating with mechanical precision. The footage also captured something never before documented. As the vortex rotated, geometric patterns became visible within the blackness. Angular lines and curves that momentarily formed recognizable shapes before dissolving back into the dark water. Several passengers reported feeling inexplicably drawn toward the vortex, describing an almost physical sensation of being pulled, not just physically but mentally, toward the rotating blackness. 3 individuals had to be physically restrained by crew members when they attempted to jump overboard, apparently compelled by an irresistible urge to enter the water. Most disturbing was the audio captured in these recordings. The sounds emanating from the vortex were clearly audible, even over the ship's engines and the excited conversations of passengers. Audio analysis later revealed that these sounds contained patterns that precisely matched the electromagnetic signature of human brain activity during states of extreme fear and ecstasy, simultaneously. How such neural patterns could be translated into audible sound remains unexplained. The Atlantic Explorer incident marked a turning point in scientific approaches to the black whirlpools. What had previously been investigated primarily as an oceanographic anomaly was now recognized as potentially involving psychological, even neurological dimensions. The phenomenon's apparent ability to influence human behavior suggested properties beyond the merely physical. In 2018, a joint research initiative between NOAA and the Department of Defense deployed a series of unmanned surface vessels equipped with specialized sensors to areas where black whirlpools had been reported. These autonomous craft were programmed to maintain a safe distance while gathering data if a vortex appeared. In March 2019, one of these vessels successfully recorded an entire black whirlpool event from formation to dissolution. The data it transmitted revealed several previously undocumented properties. The black water exhibited a density approximately 30% greater than normal seawater, yet paradoxically behaved as if it were significantly less viscous. Electromagnetic readings showed that the rotating vortex generated a field pattern that oscillated in precise mathematical ratios corresponding to the Fibonacci sequence. Most perplexing was the thermal imaging data, which showed that the black water maintained a constant temperature of exactly -3.7 degrees Celsius, 25.3 degrees Fahrenheit, throughout its volume, a temperature at which seawater should be frozen solid, yet the vortex remained fluid and continued to rotate. Perhaps most significant was what the sensors detected at the moment of the vortex's dissolution. For approximately 1.3 seconds before the black water disappeared, instruments registered what one physicist described as a localized suspension of conventional physics. Gravity measurements flickered. Time-stamped data packets exhibited inconsistencies, suggesting a brief distortion in the temporal flow. And most remarkably, sensors detected a surge of exotic particles consistent with those theorized to exist during quantum tunneling events, essentially a momentary connection between different points in space-time. The implications were profound and disturbing. What if the black whirlpools weren't simply unusual oceanographic phenomena, but something far more fundamental, actual ruptures in the fabric of reality? Dr. Samantha Reeves, a theoretical physicist who analyzed the data, proposed a hypothesis that remains controversial but has gained traction among researchers. The black whirlpools appear to be manifestations of localized Einstein-Rosen bridges, what laypeople would call wormholes, connecting our reality with somewhere else. The conservation of mass and energy requires that whatever disappears into these vortices must go somewhere. The question is, where? Or perhaps more accurately, to what? Reports of black whirlpools continue to emerge from New England waters, though with less frequency than during the peak periods of the 1980s and early 2000s. The Coast Guard maintains its caution zones, and commercial vessels are required to report any sightings immediately. The true nature of these perfectly circular vortices of impossible black water, their origin, their purpose, and the destination of everything they consume, remains one of the ocean's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. The screams that emanate from their depths continue to haunt those who have heard them, leaving witnesses with the unshakable impression that the boundary between our world and something unfathomably alien may be thinner than we dare to imagine, and that sometimes that boundary opens up to reveal the darkness beyond. Story 9. Conshelf radio signals and missing divers. From the terrifying vortices of New England's black whirlpools, we now descend beneath the surface to explore another maritime mystery, one involving an abandoned underwater habitat, inexplicable radio transmissions, and the disturbing disappearance of divers who ventured too close to a forgotten relic of oceanic exploration. In the early 1960s, legendary oceanographer Jacques Cousteau embarked on one of his most ambitious projects, the Continental Shelf Station, or Conshelf program. This revolutionary initiative aimed to prove that humans could live and work underwater for extended periods, establishing bases on the continental shelf that might eventually lead to permanent underwater colonies. Conshelf 1, launched in 1962, was a modest beginning, a small underwater habitat in which 2 oceanauts lived for a week at a depth of 10 meters off the coast of Marseille, France. Conshelf 2, deployed the following year near Sudan in the Red Sea, was more ambitious, housing 5 men for a month at a depth of 11 meters with a smaller satellite structure at 30 meters. But it is Conshelf 3, established in 1965, that lies at the heart of our mystery. This sophisticated underwater station was anchored at a depth of 100 meters, 328 feet, near Nice, France. 6 oceanauts lived in this pressurized habitat for 3 weeks, conducting experiments and venturing out in specialized diving gear to work on the seabed. After the experiment's conclusion, the Conshelf program was abandoned. The economics of underwater habitation proved impractical, and interest shifted to outer space exploration. Conshelf 1 and 2 were removed from their locations, their components either repurposed or displayed in museums. But Conshelf 3 remained on the seafloor, too costly and complex to recover, a forgotten monument to underwater ambition. For nearly 2 decades, the abandoned habitat sat silently on the Mediterranean seabed, visited occasionally by technical divers but otherwise left to the encroaching marine life. Then, in 1984, something strange began to happen. A French fishing vessel, the Madeleine, reported picking up unusual radio transmissions while operating in the vicinity of the Conshelf 3 site. Captain Etienne Beaumont, a veteran sailor familiar with all forms of maritime communications, described the signals as unlike any radio traffic I have ever heard. The transmissions came through on standard emergency frequencies but consisted of sequences of tones and pulses that followed no known protocol. Most disturbing was Beaumont's description of what happened when his radio operator attempted to record the signals. As soon as we connected the recording equipment, the transmission changed. It began broadcasting what sounded like human voices, but distorted, as if underwater. They spoke in French English, and what our radio man believed was Russian. The only clear phrase, repeated several times, was, "Come down to us." Initially, maritime authorities suspected a prank, perhaps perpetrated by recreational divers visiting the Conshelf structure. An inspection team was dispatched to investigate the habitat, expecting to find unauthorized equipment installed by vandals or researchers. The 4-person team, led by experienced salvage diver Marcel Fournier, descended to the Conshelf 3 site on October 12, 1984. They were scheduled to spend approximately 2 hours examining the exterior, and if possible the interior of the station before returning to their support vessel. They never surfaced. After 5 hours with no communication, a second team was dispatched to search for the missing divers. They found the Conshelf habitat undisturbed, with no sign of the inspection team. The only unusual observation was that the habitat's long-dormant external lights appeared to be functioning, casting a pale blue glow across the sea floor, despite the fact that the structure had been without power for nearly 20 years. The search for the missing divers continued for 2 weeks but yielded nothing. No bodies, no equipment, no evidence of what might have happened to 4 experienced professionals in relatively accessible waters. Then the radio transmissions resumed, but with a horrifying new element. Interspersed with the cryptic sequences of tones and pulses were voice transmissions that multiple independent analysts identified as belonging to the missing divers. Family members confirmed the identities of the voices, which spoke in fragmented, disjointed sentences, often describing observing their own search parties from below. Michel Fournier, brother of the missing team leader, provided a recording of one transmission to the newspaper Le Monde. In it, a voice matching Marcel's can be heard saying, "The station is not abandoned. It has never been abandoned. They were here before us, and they welcomed us. Others should join us. The pressure is not a problem once you understand." The French Navy promptly established a restricted zone around the Conshelf 3 site and claimed jurisdiction over the investigation. All records were classified, and the site was placed under surveillance. Officially, the disappearance of the 4 divers was attributed to equipment failure and disorientation, resulting in fatal exposure. But rumors persisted, fueled by occasional leaks from the investigation and continued reports of strange radio transmissions from vessels passing near the restricted zone. These transmissions reportedly became more complex over time, evolving from simple tones and pulses to elaborately structured signals that some communications experts suggested contained encoded information, mathematical sequences, geometric formulas, and fragments of what appeared to be schematics or blueprints. In 1987, the French government announced that the Conshelf 3 habitat had been removed and disposed of in deep water as a hazardous structure. Photographs were released showing the salvage operation and the empty seabed where the station had stood. For a time, the strange transmissions ceased, and the incident faded from public attention. Then, in 1993, a recreational diving boat operating approximately 3 kilometers from the former Conshelf site picked up a distress call on their radio. The male voice spoke in French, identifying himself as Marcel Fournier and requesting immediate assistance at the Conshelf 3 habitat. The boat's captain, aware of the Fournier incident from a decade earlier, contacted the authorities rather than investigating directly. A Navy team was dispatched to the coordinates provided in the transmission. They reported finding nothing unusual on the seabed, no structure, no divers in distress, nothing to explain the origin of the call. However, a crew member from the diving boat who had recorded the transmission later claimed that when the Navy team descended, a second transmission was received. "They're here now. They won't find anything. They refuse to see. We will help them to see." Over the next 3 decades, a disturbing pattern emerged. Despite the official removal of the Conshelf habitat, 9 divers have vanished while exploring the general area where it once stood. In each case, the circumstances were similar: experienced divers, proper equipment, good conditions, and no distress signals. And in the aftermath of each disappearance, vessels in the vicinity reported brief radio transmissions containing voices that family members or colleagues identified as belonging to the missing individuals. In 2015, advances in deep-sea imaging technology enabled a private research vessel to conduct a surreptitious survey of the seabed in the restricted zone. The resulting sonar images revealed a troubling discrepancy in the official narrative: a large structure consistent with the dimensions of Conshelf. 3 remained on the seafloor, exactly where it had been placed in 1965. When these images were published online, the website was quickly taken down, and the researchers behind the survey declined to comment further, citing legal concerns. Most disturbing are the reports from fishermen and merchant vessels that still occasionally detect unusual radio signals when passing through the area. These modern transmissions have evolved beyond cryptic codes or distorted voices. They now reportedly contain precise technical information, pressure tolerances for various materials, theoretical approaches to human physiology adaptation, and descriptions of biological and mechanical hybridization techniques. Dr. Eleanor Cassidy, a marine technology historian who has studied the Conshelf program extensively, offers perhaps the most unsettling perspective on the mystery. The original Conshelf 3 mission was about proving humans could adapt to live in the deep ocean environment. The official record shows that when the oceanauts returned to the surface after 3 weeks, they experienced significant physiological and psychological readjustment issues. Several never fully readapted to surface life. One has to wonder, what if the true goal wasn't bringing humans to the ocean floor temporarily, but transforming them to exist there permanently? French naval records related to Conshelf 3 remain classified, as do all official investigations into the missing divers. The area remains under surveillance, with unauthorized approaches promptly intercepted by patrol vessels. Oceanographic research in the surrounding waters requires special permits and is subject to strict limitations. Meanwhile, late at night, on barely used emergency frequencies, the transmissions continue. Pulses, tones, voices that shouldn't exist, and increasingly detailed instructions for transforming the human body to exist in an environment where it was never meant to survive. Are these signals merely elaborate hoaxes perpetuated over decades, misinterpreted natural phenomena? Or is something beneath the waves reaching out, calling more humans down to join whatever now inhabits the abandoned underwater station, something that was once human but has become something else entirely? As we ascend from the disturbing depths of the Conshelf mystery, we turn our attention to another oceanic enigma, a region of the Philippine Sea known to local fishermen as the Devouring depths, where the very seafloor seems to open up and swallow those who venture into its territory. Story 10. The Philippine Sea, Devouring Depths. From the eerie radio signals of Conshelf 3, we now sail to the Western Pacific, where an area of the Philippine Sea harbors a mystery so profound, it has shaped the maritime culture of an entire region. Local fishermen call it the Lumulan na Kailalaman, the Devouring Depths, a place where vessels vanish without warning, where the sea itself seems to open up and swallow everything in its path, and where something ancient and unfathomable may lurk beneath the seafloor. The Philippine Sea, bordered by the archipelagos of the Philippines, Taiwan, and Japan, is known for its extraordinary depths. The region includes the Mariana Trench, the deepest point in the world's oceans. But approximately 180 nautical miles east of the Philippine island of Samar lies an area that, while not as deep as the Challenger Deep, inspires far greater fear among those who make their living on these waters. For generations, Filipino fishermen have passed down warnings about this region. Traditional lore describes it as a place where the boundary between our world and the realm of Bakunawa, a sea dragon from Philippine mythology that devours the moon during eclipses, grows thin. These tales speak of waters that suddenly churn and darken, of boats that disappear in calm seas, and of survivors who return forever changed, speaking of impossible things they've glimpsed beneath the waves. Modern incidents began to be formally documented in the late 1970s, when the expansion of the Philippine fishing fleet led more vessels to venture into these traditionally avoided waters. Between 1978 and 1984, 17 fishing boats were reported missing in the region, with no storms or other natural phenomena to explain their disappearance. Notably, no debris was ever recovered from these vanishings. The vessels simply ceased to exist. The first scientific investigation of the area came in 1985, when the research vessel Kaimuko, operated by the University of Hawaii, conducted a bathymetric survey of the region. The resulting data revealed something unusual: a roughly circular depression in the seafloor, approximately 12 kilometers in diameter, with steeply sloping sides descending to a relatively flat central plain at a depth of about 8,500 meters. Dr. Howard Chen, the lead geologist on the expedition, noted several anomalies in this formation. "The symmetry is what first caught our attention," he wrote in his initial report. "Natural trenches and depressions typically follow fault lines or tectonic boundaries, resulting in elongated or irregular shapes. This depression is almost perfectly circular, as if it had been carved out with precision." More puzzling were the acoustical properties of the depression. When the research team deployed sonar equipment to map the feature in detail, they encountered what Dr. Chen described as selective reflectivity. The sonar signals returned clear data from the sloping sides but provided inconsistent or no returns from the central plane. It was as if the bottom of the depression was alternating between solid matter and something else. At times, Dr. Chen noted, it was like sounding an empty space beneath the seafloor, a void where solid rock should be. Then, moments later, the same area would return signals consistent with a normal seabed. The Kaimuko's expedition ended prematurely when their primary sonar array malfunctioned after 3 days of mapping operations. The equipment, later examined by the manufacturer, showed evidence of unusual electrical surges that had burned out critical components. More troubling was the discovery that the backup systems, which hadn't been used, showed identical damage patterns. The next documented encounter with the anomalous region occurred in 1992, when a Japanese merchant vessel, the Harukaze Maru, reported a significant navigational event while passing through the area. Captain Takeshi Nomura described how his ship suddenly lost all power and began to drift toward the center of what appeared to be a large circular disturbance in the water, a disturbance not caused by wind or currents, but resembling a slow, deliberate rotation of the entire sea surface, like water draining from a basin. As the powerless vessel was drawn toward the center of this rotation, crew members observed what Nomura described as a column of blackness rising from below, a vertical structure of what appeared to be water but was darker than the surrounding sea, moving against the current and maintaining its columnar shape in defiance of natural fluid dynamics. Before the Harukaze Maru reached the center of the phenomenon, power mysteriously returned to the ship's systems, allowing Captain Nomura to navigate away from the disturbance. The incident lasted approximately 28 minutes, during which all communications equipment failed and the ship's chronometers reportedly stopped functioning. When communications were restored, the crew discovered a 40-minute discrepancy between their ship's time and the standardized maritime time system. Following the Harukaze Maru incident, the Japanese Maritime Safety Agency established a cautionary zone around the coordinates, advising vessels to avoid the area if possible. This unofficial restriction remained in place until 1998, when a dedicated research expedition was organized to investigate the phenomenon more thoroughly. The Philippine-Japanese Cooperative Marine Research Program deployed the research vessel Bayani to conduct an extended study of the region. Equipped with advanced sonar systems, core sampling equipment, and underwater camera sleds, the Bayani was prepared for a comprehensive examination of the seafloor anomaly. The expedition seemed to progress smoothly at first. The research team successfully mapped the perimeter of the depression and collected sediment samples from its sloping sides. Initial analysis of these samples revealed nothing unusual, standard deep-sea clays and silts consistent with the surrounding seabed. Everything changed on the 8th day of the expedition, when the Bayani positioned itself directly over the center of the depression to deploy its deep-water camera sled. According to the ship's log, at 14:37, all electronic systems aboard the vessel experienced a simultaneous power surge. The backup generators activated automatically, but failed 90 seconds later. What followed was documented in the handwritten emergency log maintained by First Officer Manuel Santos, the only contemporary record of events as they unfolded. 14:40, all power systems down. Captain has ordered emergency protocols. Sea conditions changing rapidly. Surface of water around vessel appears to be rotating counterclockwise, creating a depression estimated at 30 meters across. 15:05. Depression has expanded to approximately 100 meters diameter. Ship is being drawn towards center. Water at center appears unnaturally dark. Attempted to launch emergency beacons, but they failed to activate. 15:17. Significant vertical disturbance observed approximately 300 meters off starboard bow. Black water column rising from depth, estimated 15 meters in diameter, reaching height of approximately 10 meters above sea level before collapsing back. Multiple similar columns now visible in 360-degree pattern around vessel. 15:23. Water columns converging toward ship. Dr. Kimura reports sonar readings captured before power loss showed large void opening beneath seafloor directly below our position. Captain has ordered abandoned ship procedures. 15:26. Cannot deploy lifeboats. Mechanical systems jammed. Water columns now at ship's hull. Material appears viscous, more dense than normal seawater. Making contact with hull plating produces audible vibration throughout vessel. 15:31. Hull integrity compromised at multiple points. Black substance entering lower decks. Crew members in contact with substance report numbness, followed by intense pain. 2 researchers trapped in lower lab. 15:40. Captain has ordered all personnel to upper deck. Estimated 18 crew members unaccounted for. Ship listing 22 degrees to port. Sea surface now uniform. Black extending to horizon in all directions. 15:43. Large section of aft deck has separated from main structure. Visible portion appears to be dissolving rather than sinking. Dr. Takahashi believes the black substance is analyzing our molecular structure, says it is sampling us. 15:47. Disturbance beneath vessel. Ship being lifted. Can see exposed seafloor on all sides, appearing as circular wall. We are suspended over what looks like a perfectly round hole in the bottom of the ocean. Cannot estimate depth. 15:49. Movement below. Enormous shadow rising. Not a solid object. Appears to be composed of the black substance but organized, assuming a definite form. Multiple observers reporting geometric structures visible within the mass. 15:51. The form is still ascending, now visible above water surface, surrounding the ship on all sides. Configuration resembles... The log ends mid-sentence. No further entries were made. 3 days later, the Bayani was discovered adrift approximately 70 nautical miles from its last reported position. The vessel was intact, with no visible damage to its hull or superstructure. Power systems were functional. Navigation equipment operated normally. But of the 43 crew members and researchers who had been aboard, only 22 remained, all found unconscious in their respective quarters, with no memory of what had transpired after the initial power failure. The missing personnel included Captain Rodrigo Delgado, First Officer Manuel Santos, who had maintained the emergency log, and 7 members of the scientific team, including the expedition's lead researchers. The emergency log itself was found in Santos's cabin, but the final pages had been torn out. Most disturbing were the sonar recordings recovered from the ship's data storage systems. Though corrupted, technicians were able to reconstruct partial images captured in the moments before the power failure. These images appeared to show a massive cavity opening beneath the seafloor, not a natural cave or trench, but what multiple analysts described as an artificially constructed chamber, with dimensions suggesting it could encompass several cubic kilometers. Within this chamber, the sonar had detected objects of enormous size moving in coordinated patterns. The resolution was insufficient to identify these objects clearly, but their movement behaviors were inconsistent with any known marine life. As one analyst noted, these aren't animals, they're machines, or perhaps something that blurs the distinction between the two. Since the Bayani incident, no official research expeditions have returned to the area. The region has been designated a restricted zone by both Philippine and Japanese maritime authorities, ostensibly due to unstable geological conditions. However, satellite monitoring has revealed a troubling development. The circular depression in the seafloor appears to be expanding at a rate of approximately 300 meters per year, its perfect symmetry maintained as it grows. Current estimates place its diameter at nearly 17 kilometers, 40% larger than when first mapped in 1985. Local fishing vessels that operate near the periphery of the restricted zone continue to report unusual phenomena. Most common are sightings of the black water columns, which rise without warning, even in calm seas. These columns now reportedly reach heights of up to 30 meters and maintain their structure for several minutes before collapsing. More concerning are recent accounts of these columns making deliberate contact with vessels. In 2017, the fishing boat Maria Elena reported being sampled by one such column. According to Captain Felipe Agoncillo, the black substance enveloped the port side of his vessel for approximately 40 seconds before retreating. During this brief contact, all metal surfaces touched by the substance showed accelerated corrosion, with intricate spiral patterns etched into the material, patterns that one metallurgist described as resembling circuit diagrams. Most alarming of all are the sonar images captured by various vessels operating near the zone between 2018 and 2022. These show massive voids beneath the seafloor, not just beneath the central depression, but extending outward in a radial pattern, like the spokes of a wheel. Some of these secondary chambers appear to connect with natural fault lines and trench systems, suggesting that whatever lurks beneath the Philippine Sea may be expanding its domain. The indigenous maritime communities of the eastern Philippines continue to treat the region with the same reverence and fear their ancestors did centuries ago. Modern sailors have adopted the traditional practice of making offerings before voyages that will take them anywhere near the restricted zone, small carved figurines wrapped in copper wire, cast into the sea as a gesture of respect to whatever dwelling place of ancient power lies beneath the waves. As Filipino fisherman Ricardo Macareg told researchers documenting these customs, the old stories say Bakunawa sleeps beneath the sea, waking only to devour the moon. But the truth is, it never truly sleeps. It watches. It waits. And sometimes, when it grows hungry between moons, it opens its mouth and swallows whatever passes above. The offerings remind it that we acknowledge its power, that we respect the boundary between its world and ours. Whether natural phenomenon, undiscovered geological process, or something far more unsettling, the devouring depths of the Philippine Sea remains one of the ocean's most disturbing mysteries, a place where the solid bottom of the world may not be as solid or as absolute as we prefer to believe. As we navigate away from the expanding void beneath the Philippine Sea, our journey leads us to the waters of the Adriatic, where another enigma awaits, not a physical anomaly, but a layer within the sea itself that affects the human mind in ways science struggles to explain. Story 11. The Adriatic Death Layer. From the physical anomalies of the Philippine Sea, we now turn to a mystery that blurs the boundary between the material and the mental, a phenomenon discovered in the azure waters of the Adriatic Sea that challenges our understanding of how the ocean can affect human consciousness. Unlike many maritime enigmas that manifest as visible disturbances or physical dangers, this one remains hidden beneath a deceptively beautiful surface, its effects revealed only when it's too late. The Adriatic Sea, nestled between the Italian peninsula and the Balkan coastline, has been a cradle of Mediterranean civilization for millennia. Its waters have carried Phoenician traders, Roman galleys, Venetian merchant ships, and modern cruise liners. Artists have celebrated its stunning blue clarity, and tourists flock to its picturesque shores. But in 2009, a research team from the University of Zagreb made a discovery that cast a shadow over this idyllic image. While conducting a routine oceanographic survey approximately 27 kilometers southeast of the Croatian island of Vis, researchers detected something unusual in the water column. A distinct layer of altered salinity and density at a depth between 18 and 22 meters. Such thermoclines and haloclines, layers of temperature and salinity change, are common in oceans worldwide, but this particular formation displayed properties that defied conventional explanation. Dr. Miroslav Kovac, the lead oceanographer, noted that the layer maintained its discrete boundaries despite conditions that should have caused mixing with the surrounding water. It was as if this stratum of seawater existed in isolation from normal hydrodynamic processes, maintaining its integrity regardless of currents, temperature changes, or wave action above. Initial water samples revealed elevated concentrations of several unusual compounds, including complex organic molecules that didn't match any known marine biochemical processes. Most notable was a previously unidentified bacterium present in concentrations far higher than typically found in seawater. The microorganism, temporarily designated ZC033, displayed a unique cellular structure and metabolic pathway unlike anything in the taxonomic record. We thought we'd discovered a new extremophile adapted to this specific oceanic niche, Dr. Kovac later explained. We had no idea we were dealing with something far more significant and potentially dangerous. The research team expanded their survey, mapping the unusual water layer across a roughly oval-shaped region approximately 32 square kilometers in area. The layer maintained a consistent thickness of about 4 meters throughout this zone but became imperceptible at the boundaries, as if deliberately confining itself to this specific region. The next phase of research involved more detailed analysis of water samples in the university's marine biology laboratory. This is where the first hint of the layer's disturbing properties emerged. 3 research assistants who had been working with concentrated samples of the layer reported experiencing unusual symptoms: vivid, intrusive dreams featuring underwater imagery, difficulty concentrating, and what one described as memories that don't belong to me. Initially, these effects were attributed to routine laboratory hazards, perhaps exposure to preservation chemicals or simple fatigue from overwork. Then came the first tragedy. Dr. Anna Petrovich, a marine microbiologist who had been conducting extensive analysis of the ZC033 bacterium, was found dead in her laboratory, an apparent suicide. Security footage showed her calmly writing in her research journal before ingesting a lethal mixture of laboratory chemicals. Her final journal entry, written minutes before her death, contained a single recurring phrase: "They're waiting for us below. They've always been waiting." The incident was devastating to the close-knit research team, but was treated as an isolated tragedy, a brilliant scientist succumbing to the pressures of academic work. The investigation might have ended there if not for what happened 2 weeks later. Dr. Stefan Novak, the biochemist who had taken over Petrovich's work with the bacteria, abruptly left his apartment at 3 a.m., drove to the coast, and walked into the Adriatic Sea. His body was recovered the following morning. In his pocket was a note containing coordinates that corresponded exactly to the center of the mapped anomalous layer. When a third researcher, technician Marko Lukic, began exhibiting similar behavioral changes, including creating intricate drawings of what appeared to be underwater structures and entities that he claimed to see when he closed his eyes, the university administration intervened, halting all research related to the water layer pending a comprehensive safety review. Dr. Kovac, concerned that standard procedures might miss whatever had affected his colleagues, reached out to Dr. Eleanor Rand, a neurobiologist specializing in environmental toxins at Oxford University. Dr. Rand's analysis of preserved water samples yielded the first scientific breakthrough in understanding the phenomenon. The ZC033 bacterium, she discovered, produced a complex neurotoxin with unique properties. Unlike most marine toxins that cause direct damage to nerve tissue, this compound appeared to specifically target areas of the brain associated with memory formation, emotional regulation, and perception of reality. More disturbingly, its molecular structure suggested it could cross the blood-brain barrier with extraordinary efficiency, even through minimal skin contact with contaminated water. "This isn't a simple toxin," Dr. Rand wrote in her preliminary report. "Its structure suggests a compound specifically evolved to affect neurological function in a precise, almost designed manner. The question isn't just what it does, but why a marine bacterium would evolve to produce a substance that so specifically targets mammalian and particularly human neural pathways." With this new understanding, authorities established a prohibited zone around the affected area, warning all vessels to avoid the region and prohibiting diving, fishing, or water sampling. A cover story about potential industrial contamination was circulated to explain the restrictions without causing public alarm. Meanwhile, a classified research initiative began, operating from a repurposed naval vessel equipped with biosafety laboratories. The mission: to understand the true nature and origin of what locals had begun to call Slaj Smrti, the death layer. Working with extreme safety protocols, including fully isolated diving systems, researchers made several crucial discoveries. First, the layer wasn't static. It moved slowly but deliberately within its boundaries, occasionally forming concentrated pockets before dispersing again, almost like a conscious entity adjusting its distribution. Second, the ZC033 bacterium appeared to be just one component of a complex microbiological ecosystem within the layer, an ecosystem that functioned with a level of cooperation and specialization more reminiscent of multicellular organisms than microbial colonies. Third, and most disturbing, was the discovery that the neurotoxin's effects weren't random or simply destructive. They followed a pattern, inducing specific sequences of hallucinations, thought patterns, and behaviors in affected individuals. Dr. Marija Horvat, a neuropsychiatrist who reviewed the records of the affected researchers, identified a progression of symptoms that appeared consistent across all cases. Phase 1. Vivid dreams of underwater environments, often featuring structures or entities not described in any known marine biology text. These dreams were consistently described as more real than reality, and left subjects with a sense of longing upon waking. Phase 2. Intrusive thoughts and pseudo-memories. Subjects reported experiencing detailed recollections of events they couldn't possibly have witnessed, primarily involving ancient civilizations and oceanic geological events predating human history. Phase 3. Compulsive behaviors, particularly creating artwork depicting underwater scenes, writing in unknown scripts, or attempting to return to the sea. Subjects reported these compulsions as feeling externally imposed but not distressing. Rather, they described them as finally understanding what I'm supposed to do. The final phase, which claimed both Dr. Petrovich and Dr. Novak, involved what Dr. Horvat described as complete disassociation from human identity. Subjects no longer recognized themselves as human beings, but rather as temporarily displaced entities whose true existence awaited them beneath the waves. What we're observing, Dr. Horvat concluded, is not random neural damage, but a systematic reprogramming of human consciousness, as if the bacterium is attempting to convert human neural patterns to something else. Something that finds the concept of walking into the sea to one's death not just acceptable, but desirable. In 2013, the research vessel Triton, which had been serving as the floating laboratory for the Death Layer investigation, reported unusual equipment malfunctions while positioned over the center of the affected zone. Electronic systems experienced inexplicable power fluctuations, and sonar readings revealed what appeared to be large objects moving beneath the vessel at a depth of approximately 80 meters, far below the anomalous water layer itself. When the Triton deployed a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, to investigate these contacts, video transmission became distorted as the device approached the layer. The last clear images showed the distinct boundary of the anomalous water, a visible interface where normal Adriatic blue transitioned to a subtly different hue, more opaque and somehow darker, despite being physically transparent. The ROV's feed went completely dark as it penetrated this boundary. When visual contact was re-established 2 minutes later, the camera showed only swirling particles, as if the water was filled with suspended sediment, though no such turbidity had been visible from above. The ROV's mechanical arm, extended to collect a sample, appeared to be interacting with something solid despite sonar showing open water in all directions. 14 minutes into the dive, the ROV's power system failed. The backup battery activated automatically but drained to zero in less than 30 seconds, a physical impossibility according to the device's engineers. The research team attempted to retrieve the ROV using its emergency recovery cable, but tension readings indicated the device had become anchored to something below. When the cable was finally retracted, it returned empty. The ROV, valued at $3.2 million, had somehow detached or been detached. The Triton itself began experiencing escalating technical difficulties. Crew members reported hearing unusual sounds through the hull, described variously as whispering, singing, or conversations in an unknown language. Most troublingly, several crew members who had never directly handled water samples began showing early symptoms of neurotoxin exposure. Captain Markovich made the decision to evacuate the area immediately. As the Triton departed, multiple crew members on the observation deck reported seeing what appeared to be human figures suspended in the water at precisely the depth of the anomalous layer, visible momentarily before fading from view. The Triton returned to port, where the entire crew was placed under medical observation. While most showed no lasting effects, 3 individuals, all of whom had reported seeing the submerged figures, developed severe psychological symptoms. They spoke of establishing communication with what they described as the layer's architects, and insisted that humanity had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of consciousness, evolution, and our place in the world's oceans. Dr. Nikola Jankovic, the expedition's lead biologist, became the investigation's 3rd fatality when he locked himself in a pressure chamber at the research facility and manually depressurized it, leaving behind an extensive document that authorities immediately classified. Sources who viewed this document before its restriction claim it contained detailed drawings of what Jankovic described as conversion chambers, structures purportedly located on the sea floor beneath the layer, designed to help humans transition to their next evolutionary state. By 2015, Croatian and Italian authorities had established a permanent restricted zone around the layer, with naval vessels patrolling its perimeter and all civilian navigation directed to avoid the area. Official statements cited environmental hazards without elaboration. Independent researchers analyzing satellite imagery noted that the restricted zone had grown since its original establishment, suggesting the layer might be expanding. Thermal imaging showed unusual temperature patterns in the water, precisely corresponding to the boundaries of the controlled area, patterns that pulse in rhythmic sequences, defying natural oceanographic processes. Perhaps most disturbing are the reports from fishing communities along the Croatian coast, who speak of changes in marine life captured near the restricted zone. Local fishermen describe behavioral abnormalities in otherwise normal fish, schools moving in unnaturally geometric patterns, different species coordinating their movements, and individual specimens that appear to observe human activities with uncharacteristic attention. In 2019, Italian naval authorities intercepted a small vessel attempting to enter the restricted zone. The 5 individuals aboard, all former marine biologists from various European institutions, had formed what investigators described as a cult centered around the belief that the death layer represented the next phase of terrestrial evolution. Documents recovered from their vessel spoke of joyful dissolution and reunification with the greater consciousness. Most recently, acoustic monitoring stations positioned around the perimeter of the restricted zone have detected low-frequency sounds emanating from the center of the layer, sounds that follow mathematical patterns consistent with language. Cryptolinguists who have analyzed these recordings describe them as having syntactical structures suggesting deliberate communication rather than random natural phenomena. Dr. Elizabeth Matthews, a marine biologist who has studied the available data on the death layer, offers perhaps the most unsettling theory about its nature and purpose. What if this isn't contamination or pollution or even a natural anomaly? The systematic way the neurotoxin reorients human consciousness toward the sea, the apparent immunity of marine life to its effects, the organized microbial ecosystem within the layer, these suggest intentional design. Perhaps what we're observing is a conversion system, one that identifies terrestrial intelligences and neurologically prepares them for integration into a marine-based consciousness. The question isn't what the death layer is, but who created it, and why they want to recruit human minds. The Adriatic death layer remains under strict quarantine, studied only through remote sensing and automated sampling devices. The true nature of the ZC033 bacterium, its origins, and the ultimate fate of those whose minds it has transformed remain one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries beneath the waves. As we depart the psychologically perilous waters of the Adriatic, our journey takes us to a remote island in the South Pacific, where another oceanic enigma awaits, one involving ancient remains that defy categorization and a curse that seems to follow all who encounter them. Story 12. The Mermaid Remains Curse. From the mind-altering waters of the Adriatic, we now journey to the warm shores of Fiji, where a discovery made in the shallow waters of a remote lagoon has spawned a legacy of inexplicable deaths, haunting visions, and scientific confusion. This is the disturbing tale of what local islanders call Nayago ni Drua Waitui, the cursed remains of the sea woman. The story begins in 2007 on Vanuatu, Fiji's second-largest island. A powerful cyclone had recently swept through the region, altering coastlines and shifting underwater topography throughout the archipelago. On the island's eastern shore, near the small village of Naisogavao, the storm had carved away several meters of beach and exposed what appeared to be an ancient burial site, partially submerged in a shallow lagoon. Local fisherman Tavita Nakatoga was the first to notice the unusual formation, what looked like a stone sarcophagus partially embedded in the coral reef, approximately 30 meters from shore. According to Nakatoga's account, he initially assumed it was merely an unusual coral formation, perhaps resembling human craftsmanship through coincidence rather than design. That perception changed when the receding tide revealed unmistakable carved symbols on the sarcophagus lid, geometric patterns interwoven with what appeared to be stylized depictions of marine life. More intriguing still was the realization that the material wasn't coral or limestone as he had first assumed, but a dense, dark stone not native to the Fijian islands. Nakatoga reported his find to village elders, who recognized the significance of the discovery. Rather than attempting to open the sarcophagus themselves, they contacted the University of the South Pacific in Suva, which dispatched a small archaeological team led by Dr. James Harrington, an Australian expert in Pacific maritime cultures. What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that continues to baffle scientists and terrify locals to this day. Upon arriving at the site, Dr. Harrington and his team of 4 researchers established a temporary field station on the beach nearest the submerged sarcophagus. Initial survey work confirmed that the object was indeed artificial, a stone container approximately 2.2 meters long and 1 meter wide, carved from basalt that preliminary testing suggested had originated from volcanic sources in Hawaii, over 3,000 kilometers away. The presence of such a stone on a Fijian reef was itself an archaeological puzzle. The technology required to transport an object of that size across such vast oceanic distances far exceeded what conventional history attributes to ancient Pacific cultures. Furthermore, the carved symbols matched no known Polynesian, Melanesian, or Micronesian iconographic tradition, combining elements that appeared simultaneously ancient and somehow non-human in their precision. After 3 days of careful documentation, the team prepared to open the sarcophagus. Dr. Harrington's journal, later recovered, described an atmosphere of growing unease among both the researchers and local villagers who had gathered to observe. There's something about this site that affects everyone differently. Kavita, Dr. Kavita Sharma, the team's physical anthropologist, has been having intense dreams about swimming in deep water and encountering structures that she says shouldn't exist. Michael can't seem to concentrate and keeps humming the same melody over and over without realizing it. The villagers won't approach within 20 meters of the water's edge, claiming they hear voices calling from the sarcophagus at night. I've experienced nothing unusual myself, but the constant headache I've had since arriving is becoming difficult to ignore. On the morning of June 17, 2007, the team carefully removed the sarcophagus lid during low tide, revealing contents that would challenge scientific understanding and ultimately lead to tragedy for all involved. Inside was a perfectly preserved skeleton, but one unlike any human remains ever documented. The upper portion appeared humanoid, a recognizable skull, albeit with unusually large eye orbits, rib cage, and arm bones that, while proportionally longer than normal human anatomy, were clearly homologous to Homo sapiens morphology. Below the waist, however, the skeleton deviated dramatically from any known evolutionary pattern. Instead of pelvic bones and 2 separate leg structures, the lower skeleton featured an elongated spinal column extending into a gradually tapering arrangement of progressively smaller vertebrae. Where leg bones should have been, the skeleton possessed what appeared to be modified pelvic fins similar to those found in marine mammals, supported by an internal bone structure, having no parallel in either human or known aquatic species. Simply put, the remains appeared to be a literal mermaid, a being with the upper body structure of a human and the lower anatomy of a marine mammal, yet engineered in ways that suggested neither a hoax nor any known evolutionary pathway. Dr. Harrington's notes from the initial examination reveal his professional skepticism battling with the evidence before him. This has to be an elaborate forgery, Yet I can see no evidence of artificial assembly or modification. The skeleton articulates naturally, with what appear to be genuine connective tissue attachment points. The bone density and composition match what we'd expect from a marine mammal adapted to deep diving, and preliminary aging suggests the remains are between 300 to 500 years old. Either we're dealing with the most sophisticated archaeological fraud in history, or something that fundamentally alters our understanding of Pacific evolutionary biology. More puzzling still were the artifacts arranged alongside the skeleton. These included tools crafted from materials not native to Fiji, surgical implements made from a metal alloy resembling silver, but with unusual qualities that prevented tarnishing despite centuries in salt water, containers carved from a translucent stone, similar to jade, but chemically distinct from any known mineral, and most mysteriously, a series of intricately etched tablets bearing writing in an unknown script. The team collected tissue samples from the remains and carefully documented the artifacts. Plans were made to transport the entire sarcophagus to laboratory facilities in Suva for more thorough analysis. It was at this point that the first inexplicable events began to occur. That night, all 5 members of the research team experienced identical dreams of drowning, but drowning upward, sinking toward the surface rather than the seafloor, as if their perception of reality had been inverted. Upon waking, 3 team members reported seeing a female figure standing at the water's edge before dissolving into sea foam. More alarmingly, the photographic equipment containing the day's documentation was found corroded beyond repair, despite having been stored in waterproof cases well above the tide line. Digital storage devices were similarly corrupted, with files either missing entirely or replaced with what appeared to be strings of unintelligible code. The local workers who had been hired to help transport the sarcophagus refused to return to the site, citing disturbing experiences during the night. The sound of singing in an unknown language coming from the direction of the lagoon, and multiple sightings of what they described as a woman made of water moving among their sleeping quarters. Despite these unsettling developments, Dr. Harrington insisted on continuing the excavation. On June 19th, as the team prepared to relocate the sarcophagus, Dr. Sharma collapsed while wading in knee-deep water near the remains. Witnesses described her suddenly standing rigid, her eyes fixed on something beneath the surface that no one else could see, before she began speaking rapidly in a language unknown to any present, including herself, as she had no previous linguistic training beyond English and Hindi. She was evacuated to medical facilities in Labasa, where she died 12 hours later of what doctors diagnosed as a massive stroke. Autopsy results revealed bizarre anomalies. Her brain tissue showed signs of transformation at the cellular level, with neural pathways reorganized in patterns that neurologists described as not compatible with human cognitive function. More disturbing still, her final coherent words, spoken in English before losing consciousness completely, were recorded by the attending physician. "They're changing me from inside. They need to understand us before they return. I'm becoming the bridge." The remaining team members abandoned the excavation immediately, but collected samples and one of the smaller artifacts, a handheld object resembling a navigational tool, were already packed for transport. Dr. Harrington arranged for these to be sent to research facilities at the University of Sydney for comprehensive analysis, away from what he now considered a potentially contaminated site. This decision would extend the tragedy beyond Fiji's shores. Over the next 18 months, every member of the original research team died under circumstances ranging from the merely unusual to the medically impossible. Dr. Michael Chen drowned in his bathtub in a locked bathroom. Research assistant Jennifer Wade died of rapid-onset dementia at age 27, her brain showing cellular deterioration consistent with advanced age despite her youth. Dr. Harrington himself was found in his university office, his body severely dehydrated despite sitting in a pool of water, as if every drop of moisture had been extracted from his tissues in a process that forensic experts could not explain. The laboratory technicians who handled the tissue samples from the remains experienced similar fates. Of the 7 individuals who directly contacted the specimens, 5 died within 2 years of exposure. The remaining 2 survived but reported persistent hallucinations involving deep-sea environments and communications with entities they described as neither human nor animal, but something that exists in the boundary between definitions. Dr. Eleanor Bishop, the geneticist who conducted the primary DNA analysis of the remains, committed suicide after 3 months of working with the samples. Her research notes, found after her death, documented a progression from scientific objectivity to increasing obsession. Day 37. The genome continues to resist conventional sequencing techniques. It's as if the DNA reconfigures itself when we attempt to analyze it. This is, of course, impossible. Day 45. I've identified segments that appear to match human genetic markers, alongside others that correspond to several marine mammal species. But there are extensive sequences that match nothing in any terrestrial genetic database. These unknown segments appear to serve functions I cannot begin to comprehend. Day 58. The samples are changing, cellular regeneration occurring in preserved tissue that should be inert. I've verified this through multiple testing protocols. It's not contamination. The cells are responding to something. Day 62. I dreamed of the ocean floor last night, not as we see it from human perspective, but as if I belonged there. I understood things in that dream, about pressure tolerances, about communication through water density, about seeing through sound rather than light. I woke up writing in a script I've never seen before. I'm afraid to sleep now. Day 73. They're waiting for the sea levels to rise enough. They've always been here, watching us develop on land while they evolve differently below. The remains aren't a discovery. They're a message, a warning, or an invitation. I can't tell anymore. I just know I have to go to them now. Dr. Bishop was found in her bathtub, which she had filled with seawater collected from Sydney Harbor. The official cause of death was drowning, though the autopsy revealed unexplained anomalies in her lung tissue, which showed signs of adaptation for underwater respiration. Physiological changes that medical science cannot explain as having occurred within a living human in just 3 months. The genetic analysis she completed before her death yielded perhaps the most scientifically significant and disturbing conclusion. The DNA extracted from the remains matched no known evolutionary lineage, yet contained segments identical to human DNA, alongside completely novel genetic structures. It was neither a hoax nor a deformity, but appeared to be exactly what the morphology suggested, a hybrid being combining human and marine mammal characteristics, yet engineered through means beyond current scientific understanding. Following these deaths, Australian authorities classified all materials related to the Fiji remains, as they were officially designated. The samples were secured in a biohazard facility, and all research was terminated. The site of the original discovery was declared off-limits by the Fijian government, with a cover story about toxic algae blooms keeping curious visitors away. But local villagers know the truth. They maintain a careful watch over the lagoon, which they say has been permanently altered since the sarcophagus was opened. Fish avoid the area. The water is unusually still, regardless of tides or weather. And on nights when the moon is full, villagers report seeing a female figure emerging from the water, her lower body obscured by waves, extending her arms toward the shore as if beckoning. Most disturbing of all are the recent accounts from oceanographers studying sea level changes in the region. Their instruments have detected an anomalous depression in the seafloor, approximately 30 kilometers offshore from the lagoon. A perfectly circular formation, 400 meters in diameter, that appeared suddenly in 2018 and continues to deepen by approximately 1 meter every month. Sonar mapping of this depression has revealed what appear to be geometric structures on the seafloor surrounding it, structures that one researcher described as reminiscent of an ancient ceremonial site, but adapted for an underwater environment. This researcher resigned from the project shortly after this observation and relocated to a landlocked country, refusing all further contact with former colleagues. The mermaid remains of Fiji stand as one of the ocean's most disturbing unsolved mysteries, not merely for the scientific questions they raise about unknown evolutionary pathways or ancient human-animal hybridization, but for the persistent pattern of death and transformation that follows any contact with them. It is as if the remains themselves carry a message or a conversion process, reaching out from whatever lies beyond conventional understanding to touch the minds of those who disturb their rest. As local elder Samesa Naikama told researchers documenting the oral histories of the region, the old stories warn us that the people of the deep water do not die as we do. They change form, they wait, they return. The woman in the stone box was not dead. She was a message sent to prepare the way for others. And now that we have heard her song, they know we are listening. As we navigate away from the unsettling shores of Fiji and the hybrid remains that continue to defy explanation, our journey takes us to the frigid waters of the Arctic, where another maritime mystery awaits. One involving a ghost ship discovered with its crew mysteriously frozen in a way that challenges our understanding of both physics and human physiology. Story 13. The Frozen Crew of Octavius. From the tropical mysteries of Fiji, we now sail into the frigid waters of the Arctic, where one of history's most chilling maritime enigmas continues to defy conventional explanation. This is the story of the Octavius, a ghost ship discovered adrift in Arctic waters with its entire crew frozen solid at their stations, not simply dead from exposure, but preserved in a manner that modern science still struggles to explain. The tale of the Octavius begins in 1762, when the British trading vessel set sail from England, bound for China. After a successful trading voyage, the ship's captain made a fateful decision that would condemn his crew to an icy fate and create an enduring maritime mystery. Rather than returning to England via the standard route around Africa's Cape of Good Hope, the captain aimed to pioneer a route through the Northwest Passage, the legendary seaway through the Arctic archipelago of what is now northern Canada. This ambition was remarkable for its time. The Northwest Passage wouldn't be successfully navigated until nearly 50 years later, and the treacherous ice-choked waters had already claimed numerous ships and lives. Nevertheless, the Octavius ventured north into increasingly dangerous waters as autumn approached, and was never heard from again, at least not while its crew still lived. In October 1775, the whaling ship Herald was navigating the frigid waters off Greenland when its crew spotted a strange vessel drifting amidst ice floes. The ship appeared to be damaged but still seaworthy, neither wrecked on the ice nor actively sailing. More unsettling was the complete absence of movement on deck, despite the vessel being fully rigged as if underway. A boarding party from the Herald approached the mysterious ship with caution, calling out and receiving no response. What they found upon climbing aboard would become the stuff of maritime legend, a scene so eerie that it has haunted sailors' tales for centuries. The entire crew of the Octavius, for that was indeed the ship's identity confirmed by its half-rotted logbook, was aboard and at their stations. The helmsman stood at the wheel. Navigators were at their table. The captain sat in his cabin with pen in hand, logbook open before him. Sailors occupied their bunks or stood at their posts on deck. Every single soul aboard the vessel was present and accounted for, and every single one was frozen solid. This was no ordinary freezing. According to accounts recorded in the Herald's log and later repeated in numerous naval records, the crew appeared to have been instantly preserved in the midst of routine activities. There were no signs of panic, no indications of a struggle against approaching death by hypothermia. It was as if they had been flash frozen in a single moment, transformed from living men to ice sculptures between one heartbeat and the next. The boarding party, deeply unsettled by the scene, took only the ship's logbook before returning to the Herald. Even this artifact was only partially recoverable, with the last entry dated 1762, indicating the Octavius had been adrift for 13 years. The captain's final notation placed the ship in Arctic waters, attempting to force a passage through an ice field. After this, there was only an unfinished sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted mid-thought and never returned to complete it. What makes the Octavius case so disturbing, even centuries later, is the physical impossibility of what the Herald's crew reported. Normal freezing to death follows a predictable pattern. As hypothermia sets in, victims experience progressive stages of disorientation, fatigue, paradoxical undressing, removing clothes despite the cold due to neurological confusion, and finally, a terminal burrowing behavior before loss of consciousness and death. Bodies found frozen after such deaths show clear evidence of this progression: cramped positions, clothing disturbances, and the blue-gray discoloration of tissues that freeze after death has occurred. But the Octavius crew showed none of these signs. They were described as being in natural positions, with normal coloration, as if they had been instantly converted from flesh to ice in a moment of perfect preservation. For centuries, the Octavius remained a maritime legend, its impossibly frozen crew attributed to sailors' superstitions or exaggerated storytelling. Yet the core details of the account appear in multiple independent naval records, suggesting that whatever the Herald's boarding party encountered was unusual enough to be consistently documented across various sources. The mystery might have remained purely historical, if not for a surprising discovery made in 1988. During a routine archaeological exploration of a small unnamed island in the Canadian Arctic archipelago, researchers uncovered preserved human remains that had been exposed by seasonal ice melt. These remains, consisting of a partial corpse in 18th century European clothing, bore markings consistent with British naval garments of the 1760s. What made this discovery extraordinary was the state of preservation. Despite over 2 centuries of exposure to Arctic conditions, the tissue showed an unusual crystalline structure at the cellular level, a pattern of preservation that forensic experts described as inconsistent with any known natural freezing process. Dr. Karen Michaels, who led the analysis of these remains at the University of Toronto, provided a disturbing assessment. What we're seeing in these tissues suggests they weren't simply frozen after death. The cellular structure indicates a process more akin to vitrification, the transformation of organic material into a glass-like state without the formation of ice crystals that would normally damage cell walls. We have no natural explanation for how a human body could undergo such a process in an uncontrolled Arctic environment. Radiocarbon dating placed the remains within the correct time frame for the Octavius, and subsequent DNA analysis confirmed a genetic profile consistent with British ancestry. While it cannot be proven conclusively that these were the remains of an Octavius crew member, the correlation of location, time period, and the unusual preservation state has led many researchers to make this connection. In 2005, an international research team used ice core samples and historical climate data to reconstruct weather patterns in the Arctic during the period when the Octavius would have become trapped. Their findings revealed something unexpected: evidence of a localized atmospheric anomaly in the region where the ship likely made its final push into the ice pack. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, a climatologist who participated in the study, described the findings. We detected chemical signatures in ice layers from this period that indicate an unusual atmospheric event, something that created conditions unlike anything we see in normal Arctic weather patterns. The molecular structures suggest a rapid extraction of heat energy from a concentrated area, essentially creating a cold spot, with temperatures plunging hundreds of degrees below the surrounding environment in a matter of seconds. Such a phenomenon defies conventional meteorological understanding. Even the most extreme natural temperature gradients develop gradually, allowing air masses to mix and moderate. The kind of instantaneous, localized superfreezing event suggested by the ice core data simply doesn't occur in nature, at least, not according to our current understanding of atmospheric physics. Modern science has attempted to explain the Octavius mystery through various theories. Some suggest that the ship encountered a sudden release of gas hydrates from the seafloor, frozen methane compounds that, when released, could potentially create a rapid cooling effect as they expand. Others propose that a meteorological phenomenon, similar to ball lightning, but with inverse thermal properties, might have enveloped the ship. More recently, theoretical physicists have suggested that the Octavius may have briefly passed through what they term a dimensional thin point, a region where our physical universe temporarily intersects with another dimension operating under different thermodynamic laws, allowing for the instantaneous transfer of thermal energy from one realm to another. What makes the Octavius case particularly unsettling is the recent discovery that the unusual freezing phenomenon may not have been a one-time event. In 2017, autonomous underwater vehicles mapping the Arctic seafloor documented a series of shipwrecks spanning different historical periods, all exhibiting similar patterns. Vessels apparently intact, without structural damage typically associated with ice crushing, and with traces of organic material preserved in ways inconsistent with normal freezing processes. Most disturbing was the discovery in 2019 of a modern research vessel that had gone missing in 2002. Remote submersible footage showed the ship's hull intact, with equipment still functioning, emergency batteries still providing minimal power to some systems after 17 years. Inside, according to limited robotic exploration, the crew appeared to be preserved at their stations in a manner eerily reminiscent of descriptions of the Octavius. This modern ghost ship has since been designated a restricted research site, with all footage and findings classified by international agreement. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a theoretical physicist consulting on the investigation, has proposed what she calls Arctic void phenomena. The theory that certain regions of the high Arctic occasionally experience localized suspensions of normal thermodynamic laws, creating conditions where heat energy can be instantaneously extracted from matter without following standard energy transfer principles. What appears to have happened to these vessels, Dr. Vance explained in a carefully worded journal article that avoided direct reference to the classified modern incident, is less like freezing and more like the removal of the concept of heat itself from a defined space. The atomic vibrations that constitute thermal energy appear to have been not merely slowed, as in conventional freezing, but temporarily suspended altogether, as if that fundamental property of matter was briefly negated within a specific boundary. This theory, while controversial, offers the first scientifically coherent explanation for how a ship's crew could appear to be frozen in mid-action, without the physiological signs of struggling against advancing hypothermia. It wasn't that they froze to death, it's that the very concept of thermal energy was removed from their environment in an instant, transforming living tissue directly from its normal state to something closer to absolute zero without passing through the intermediate stages. The implications are profoundly disturbing. If such thermodynamic anomalies exist in the Arctic, they represent not merely a navigational hazard but a fundamental challenge to our understanding of physics. More unsettling still is the question of whether these phenomena are entirely natural or represent something else, the manifestation of properties or even technologies beyond current human comprehension. Recent analysis of satellite thermal imaging has identified several regions in the high Arctic where temperature readings occasionally exhibit impossible behaviors, zones where temperature appears to drop at rates that violate the laws of thermodynamics, creating briefly existing cold spots that disappear before they can be directly investigated. These anomalies occur most frequently along certain longitudes, forming what some researchers have begun to call the freezing meridians, paths through the Arctic where ships and aircraft are now quietly advised to avoid. The Octavius and its perfectly preserved crew remain one of the ocean's most disturbing unsolved mysteries, a case where the evidence suggests not merely an unusual event, but a fundamental violation of the physical laws we believe govern our world. Whatever force instantaneously froze those sailors at their posts over 2 centuries ago appears to still be active in the farthest northern waters, waiting in the ice and fog for those who venture into regions where the normal rules of nature may temporarily cease to apply. As we leave behind the frigid mystery of the Octavius and its impossibly frozen crew, we turn to waters of a different kind, seas that run red with a substance that, under scientific analysis, reveals properties disturbingly similar to human blood, yet genetically unlike anything that should exist in nature. Story 14. The Blood Waters of Luanda. From the impossible cold of the Arctic, we now journey to the warm coastal waters of West Africa, where one of the ocean's most visually disturbing phenomena continues to baffle scientists and terrify local communities. Off the shores of Luanda, Angola, a recurring anomaly transforms the normally blue-green Atlantic waters into a crimson tide that bears an unsettling resemblance to human blood, not merely in appearance, but in its fundamental composition. While red tides are well-documented natural occurrences worldwide, typically caused by algal blooms, what happens in the waters near Luanda defies conventional scientific explanation. Unlike normal red tides, which disperse with changing currents and conditions, the Luanda phenomenon appears with calendar-like precision, manifesting annually during the last week of August in a perfectly circular pattern, approximately 2 kilometers off the coastline of the Ilha do Cabo Peninsula. The first documented observation of this phenomenon dates to 1504, when Portuguese explorer Duarte Pacheco noted in his ship's log a sea of blood that forms perfect circles, as if drawn by divine compass, undisturbed by wave or wind. Colonial records throughout the subsequent centuries contain similar accounts, often attributed to superstition or local spiritual beliefs, rather than natural phenomena. Modern scientific investigation of the bloodwaters began in 1967, when marine biologist Dr. Manuel da Silva collected samples during one of these events. His initial analysis yielded results so unexpected that his findings were dismissed by the scientific community as procedural contamination or methodological error. Da Silva reported that the red water contained high concentrations of hemoglobin, the oxygen-carrying protein found in vertebrate blood, along with cellular structures remarkably similar to human erythrocytes, also known as red blood cells. The political instability that gripped Angola during its war for independence and subsequent civil conflict prevented further systematic research until the early 2000s. In 2003, a team from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, led by Dr. Sarah Kimball, conducted the first comprehensive modern analysis of the Luanda blood waters. Their findings confirmed De Silva's observations, while adding disturbing new details. The red coloration was indeed caused by hemoglobin and cellular structures similar to blood cells, but with crucial and inexplicable differences. The cells contained no identifiable DNA that matched any known organism. Instead, they carried a genetic structure that Dr. Kimball described as simultaneously primitive and advanced, simpler than human DNA in its base sequencing, but organized in patterns of baffling complexity that suggested capabilities beyond those of normal cellular organisms. Most unsettling was the behavior of these cells when observed under laboratory conditions. Unlike normal blood cells, which begin to deteriorate shortly after leaving the body, the Luanda specimens demonstrated remarkable persistence and apparent responsiveness to their environment. When placed in proximity to samples of human blood, the anomalous cells oriented themselves toward the human samples, eventually surrounding them in concentric patterns that mimicked the circular formation observed in the ocean. Dr. Kimball's team also discovered that the cells exhibited bioluminescent properties when agitated, emitting a faint bluish glow that pulsed in rhythmic sequences. When these sequences were analyzed by mathematicians on the research team, they were found to follow precise mathematical ratios corresponding to prime number sequences, a pattern too ordered to be random, suggesting some form of deliberate signaling or communication. Perhaps most disturbing were the thermographic readings taken during the 2003 manifestation of the blood waters. Thermal imaging revealed that the circular formation maintained a constant temperature of 37.2 degrees Celsius, equivalent to 99 degrees Fahrenheit, virtually identical to human body temperature, despite surrounding ocean waters being significantly cooler at around 22 degrees Celsius. This temperature differential created a sharp thermal boundary that remained stable regardless of currents or wind conditions, as if the blood water were somehow self-regulating its temperature. Local fishermen have long avoided the area during these annual manifestations, believing the red waters to be fundamentally dangerous to human life. According to traditions dating back centuries among the Kimbundu people indigenous to the region, the blood waters represent the breathing of something vast that sleeps beneath the sand, an entity that requires an annual sacrifice to remain dormant. This folkloric belief gained disturbing credibility in 2008, when researchers correlating historical records discovered that years in which the blood water phenomenon failed to appear corresponded precisely with years in time which major shipwrecks or maritime disasters had occurred in the vicinity. The statistical probability of this correlation occurring by chance was calculated at less than 0.00001%, suggesting a genuine causal relationship between human maritime fatalities and the absence of the bloodwater manifestation. In essence, it appeared that when humans died in the waters near Luanda, the blood phenomenon did not materialize the following August, as if it had already been satisfied by unintentional sacrifices. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a marine biochemist who joined the ongoing research in 2012, proposed what she termed the macroorganism hypothesis, the theory that the blood waters might not be a collection of independent cells, but rather the externalized circulatory medium of a much larger entity, one whose main body remains hidden beneath the seabed. What we're observing may be something analogous to blood, but belonging to an organism operating on a scale and according to biological principles we've never encountered. Dr. Rodriguez wrote in a controversial paper published in the Journal of Speculative Marine Biology. The cellular structures appear designed to interact with and potentially absorb properties from vertebrate blood, particularly human, suggesting a form of genetic sampling or harvesting. This theory gained unexpected support in 2015 when seismic surveys conducted for offshore oil exploration detected an anomalous structure beneath the seabed directly below the area where the blood waters appear. Sonar readings revealed what appeared to be a vast network of chambers and channels extending at least 400 meters into the ocean floor, arranged in patterns resembling circulatory or neural systems in known organisms, but on a gigantic scale. When this discovery was made public, local traditions suddenly seemed less like superstition and more like generations of accumulated knowledge about something very real dwelling beneath the waters of Luanda Bay. The most recent and perhaps most troubling development came in 2019, when genetic analysis of the blood water cells revealed they contained trace amounts of human DNA, specifically, genetic markers consistent with the local population. Further investigation determined that these genetic sequences showed a chronological pattern, with the most recent samples containing DNA markers from currently living individuals, while deeper analysis revealed historical genetic patterns from populations that had lived in the region centuries ago. This discovery suggested that whatever created the blood waters had been collecting and preserving human genetic information for generations, maintaining a living record of the human population along this stretch of coastline. Portuguese colonial archives, recently digitized and made searchable, revealed accounts from Catholic missionaries in the 17th century describing indigenous rituals in which small amounts of blood from every member of the community would be collected annually and poured into the sea at specific locations, practices the missionaries worked to suppress as pagan sacrifice. These blood offerings correspond precisely to the locations where the blood water phenomenon now appears, suggesting a relationship that may have been understood by indigenous peoples centuries before modern science documented it. The full implications of this relationship remain unclear, but one pattern has emerged with disturbing consistency. Individuals whose genetic markers appear most prominently in the blood water samples often disappear within 5 years of the detection, usually in connection with maritime incidents. Local fishermen now speak of being marked by the water, and some have begun reviving the ancient practice of voluntary blood offerings, believing that giving a small amount willingly might protect them from being claimed in larger measure. Dr. Adebayo Okafor, who has led research efforts since 2020, has documented multiple cases of individuals who came into direct contact with the blood waters during research expeditions, subsequently reporting identical dreams of sinking into warm darkness and becoming part of sinking into warm darkness, something vast and ancient. Brain scans of these individuals have revealed unusual activity patterns in regions associated with identity and self-recognition, as if their neurological understanding of themselves as discrete entities had been subtly altered. Most recently, unmanned submersibles equipped with specialized sampling equipment have detected trace amounts of the anomalous blood cells in ocean currents, up to 500 kilometers from the Luanda coast, suggesting that whatever generates these cells may be expanding its range. These distant samples show subtle genetic adaptations that would allow them to survive in the colder, deeper waters of the open Atlantic, adaptations that weren't present in samples from previous decades. Some researchers now speculate that the Luanda blood waters may represent not just a local phenomenon, but the visible manifestation of a much larger entity, perhaps one that extends throughout the deep ocean trenches of the Atlantic. If the macroorganism hypothesis is correct, what appears as a circumscribed annual event might actually be just a small, surface-breaching component of something whose full extent remains hidden from human observation. The waters off Luanda continue to turn blood red each August, forming their perfect circle like a pupil gazing up from the depths. Local belief holds that as long as the circle appears, the entity below remains in its dormant cycle. The alternative, what might happen if it fully awakens, remains a prospect too disturbing for even the most rational scientific minds to contemplate with equanimity. As we leave behind the crimson waters of Luanda, our journey takes us across the Atlantic to the Gulf of Mexico, where another oceanic anomaly challenges our understanding of biology, chemistry, and the effects that certain substances can have on the human mind. Story 15. The Gulf Blob Mind, Altering Properties. From the blood-red waters of Luanda, we now cross the Atlantic to the warm azure expanses of the Gulf of Mexico, where a different kind of biological anomaly has emerged in recent decades. Unlike the predictable annual manifestation off Angola's coast, this phenomenon appeared suddenly, with devastating consequences for both marine ecosystems and human minds. This is the disturbing story of what scientists have reluctantly termed the Gulf Blob, a amorphous organic mass with properties that defy conventional biological classification and effects that extend far beyond physical toxicity into the realm of consciousness itself. The first documented encounter with the Gulf Blob occurred in March 2011, when commercial fishermen approximately 70 miles south of Galveston, Texas, reported finding their nets filled with a strange, semi-translucent substance that appeared to pulsate despite having no discernible organs or circulatory system. Initial assumptions that it was a known form of jellyfish or algal colony were quickly dispelled when the material began to exhibit behaviors inconsistent with any cataloged marine organism. Captain Miguel Hernandez of the fishing vessel Marisol provided the first detailed description. It wasn't solid and it wasn't liquid, somewhere in between, like very thick gelatin, but it moved on its own. When we pulled it up, it seemed to reach out toward us, forming these tentacle-like projections that weren't there before. Most disturbing was how it affected Emilio and Diego when they touched it. Within minutes, they became different. Their eyes dilated, they began talking nonsense about hearing the ocean speaking to them. Diego became violent, something I'd never seen in 20 years of working with him. He jumped overboard, claimed he needed to join with it. We never found his body. By the time marine biologists from Texas A&M University reached the Marisol, the original specimen had dissolved, leaving only trace residues on the fishing equipment. These samples, however, would provide the first scientific insights into the Gulf blob's unusual composition. Dr. Sarah Winters, who led the initial analysis, noted several immediate anomalies. The cellular structure doesn't match any known taxonomic category. It contains DNA, but with a nucleotide ratio we've never seen in terrestrial or marine organisms. Most concerning was its neurochemical profile. The substance contained high concentrations of compounds that closely resemble human neurotransmitters, particularly those associated with consciousness alteration, but with molecular structures modified in ways that would make them dramatically more potent and able to cross the blood-brain barrier with unprecedented efficiency. The incident might have been dismissed as an isolated curiosity if not for what happened next. Over the following months, similar masses began appearing throughout the northern Gulf of Mexico. Commercial vessels reported seeing floating islands of the substance ranging from a few meters to nearly a kilometer in diameter. Satellite imagery revealed that these formations weren't random, but appeared to be gradually converging toward a central point approximately 150 miles southeast of the Mississippi River Delta. More alarming were the behavioral changes observed in marine life throughout the region. Typically predictable species began exhibiting unprecedented behaviors. Schools of fish swimming in complex geometric patterns, dolphins deliberately beaching themselves. Their sonar vocalizations altered to contain repeating mathematical sequences, even sharks, usually solitary hunters, forming coordinated groups that observers described as resembling military formations. Most disturbing were incidents involving human exposure. By late 2012, medical facilities across the Gulf Coast had documented over 200 cases of what became known as Gulf Blob syndrome, a progressive condition that began with hallucinations and euphoria, but quickly escalated to more troubling symptoms. Dr. Elena Ramirez, a neurologist at Tulane University Medical Center, who treated dozens of these cases, described the syndrome's progression. The initial phase resembles the effects of known psychedelics, but with a crucial difference. The hallucinations are consistently centered around marine themes and exhibit remarkable similarity across patients who have had no contact with each other. They report seeing the same specific underwater structures, encountering identical entities, and receiving what they describe as instructions or revelations about humanity's relationship with the ocean. As the condition progresses, patients develop what Dr. Ramirez termed distributed consciousness, the unsettling conviction that their minds have somehow expanded beyond their physical bodies to connect with a larger awareness. In advanced cases, patients lose interest in basic self-care, expressing the belief that their physical forms are merely temporary vessels for a consciousness that would soon be returned to the water. The most extreme cases culminated in violent self-harm behaviors, with patients attempting to surgically modify their bodies in ways they claimed would facilitate adaptation to aquatic existence. Several patients inserted objects into their necks in locations that eerily corresponded to where gills would be positioned on fish, while others attempted to create webbing between their fingers. These behaviors were performed with a calm, methodical precision that medical professionals found particularly disturbing, not the frantic actions of delusional individuals, but the deliberate modifications of people who believed they were following a precise blueprint for transformation. By 2014, The situation had escalated to a point where the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, established a dedicated task force to investigate the Gulf blob phenomenon. Using specialized collection equipment designed to minimize direct human contact, researchers obtained intact specimens for comprehensive analysis under strict containment protocols. The results confirmed the initial findings while adding new layers of concern. Dr. James Chen, the biochemist leading the laboratory analysis, published a heavily redacted paper describing the blob as a macroscopic manifestation of a synthetic biological hybrid system, neither fully natural nor entirely artificial, but possessing characteristics of both. The blob's fundamental structure suggests intelligent design principles. Dr. Chen wrote, yet its ability to adapt and evolve exceeds capabilities of current human bioengineering. Its molecular composition includes elements found nowhere in Earth's natural biochemistry, alongside others that appear to have been directly derived from marine mammal neural tissue. Most concerning is its apparent ability to reorganize itself at the molecular level in response to environmental stimuli, suggesting a form of distributed intelligence operating at the cellular scale. The neurochemical compounds isolated from the blob proved to be even more disturbing than initially assessed. Unlike conventional mind-altering substances that temporarily bind to neural receptors, these compounds appeared designed to permanently alter brain structure, creating new neural pathways that mimicked patterns found in marine mammals while suppressing regions associated with human-specific cognition and identity. It's as if these compounds are designed to rewire the human brain to become more cetacean-like, noted Dr. Eliza Montgomery, a neuropharmacologist consulting on the investigation. The process appears progressive and irreversible. Once exposure reaches a certain threshold, the transformation of consciousness continues even without further contact with the original substance. In September 2015, the convergence of blob formations in the Central Gulf reached a critical mass, creating a single entity estimated at 15 square kilometers in surface area. Satellite thermal imaging revealed that this mass maintained a temperature precisely 2.7 degrees Celsius higher than the surrounding water, a differential that remained constant regardless of ambient temperature fluctuations, suggesting some form of internal regulation. More alarming were the deep water sonar readings, which indicated that the visible surface formation was merely the uppermost portion of a much larger structure, extending downward in a columnar shape to a depth of approximately 1,500 meters, where it appeared to be anchored to the seafloor. The United States Navy, now actively involved in monitoring the situation, deployed unmanned submersibles to observe the underwater portion of the formation. The footage these devices transmitted before their systems failed showed something that defied easy categorization: a massive, translucent column pulsating with bioluminescent patterns that analyzed as encoded information rather than random light displays. Within this column, solid structures resembling organs or specialized chambers could be observed, connected by a network of channels through which a luminescent fluid flowed in coordinated patterns. Most disturbing was the behavior of marine life around this formation. Schools of fish circled it in precisely maintained orbits, occasionally being absorbed into the mass without apparent resistance. Larger creatures, including several species of whales, were observed remaining stationary near the column for extended periods, their normal migratory patterns completely abandoned. In January 2016, following the disappearance of 3 research vessels in the vicinity of the blob, the United States government declared a 200-mile maritime exclusion zone around the formation. Official statements cited potentially toxic algal blooms as the justification, while classified briefings to key scientific and military personnel described the situation in far more concerning terms. Dr. Rachel Sullivan, a marine biologist who resigned from NOAA in protest over the information blackout, later provided disturbing context in an interview with an independent science journal. What we're observing isn't just a biological anomaly, it's a coordinated system with apparent purpose. The neurochemical effects on humans aren't accidental, they're directed. The blob isn't just sitting there, it's actively modifying its environment and the organisms within it, including us, and it's growing both in mass and complexity. By mid-2017, coastal residents across the Gulf reported a sharp increase in unusual dreams, featuring identical imagery, vast underwater structures, beings composed of light and water, and a recurring message described as preparation for the rejoining. Medical facilities noted a correlation between dream intensity and proximity to the coast, with those living closest to the shoreline experiencing the most vivid and consistent dream content. Neurological scans of affected individuals revealed unprecedented activity in brain regions typically dormant during normal human consciousness, areas that, according to evolutionary biology, represent vestigial structures from our distant aquatic ancestry. It was as if something was systematically reactivating neural pathways that had been suppressed over millions of years of terrestrial evolution. The most recent and perhaps most troubling development came in 2020, when satellite monitoring detected evidence that microscopic components of the Blob had entered the Gulf Stream. Traces of its distinctive biochemical signature have since been identified in Atlantic currents as far north as Newfoundland and as far east as the Azores, suggesting a progressive dispersal throughout the North Atlantic basin. Marine wildlife throughout these regions has begun exhibiting the same coordinated behaviors first observed in the Gulf, while coastal populations report increasing instances of the distinctive dream patterns and psychological changes associated with blob exposure. Dr. Alexander Reynolds, currently heading the classified multidisciplinary team monitoring the phenomenon, offered a rare candid assessment during a closed congressional briefing, a transcript of which was later leaked. We're not dealing with a conventional toxin or pathogen. The Gulf blob appears to be a vector for something that might best be described as a transmitted consciousness, an organized intelligence that propagates itself not just through physical growth, but through the cognitive restructuring of the organisms it encounters. Its effects suggest a systematic attempt to reshape the neurological architecture of marine life, and increasingly humanity itself. The question we should be asking isn't just what the blob is, but what it wants us to become. The latest monitoring data indicates that the core mass in the Gulf of Mexico continues to grow at a rate of approximately 4% per month, while its neurological influence extends well beyond its physical boundaries. Coastal populations throughout the region report increasing instances of residents walking into the sea at night, drawn by what survivors describe as an overwhelming compulsion to return to the source. Most concerning to researchers is the recent observation that the blob's biochemical composition appears to be adapting to specifically target human neural receptors with increasing precision, suggesting an intelligence that is actively learning how to more effectively interface with and potentially control human consciousness. As we leave behind the mind-altering enigma of the Gulf blob, our journey takes us to the South Pacific, where another disturbing phenomenon challenges our understanding of sound, geology, and the psychological effects of certain frequencies on the human mind. In the waters surrounding the volcanic island of Hunga, Tonga, structures beneath the seabed emit acoustic signals that drive ordinary people to the edge of madness and attract creatures from the ocean's greatest depths to waters where they should never be found. Story 16. Hunga Tonga Acoustic Anomaly. From the consciousness-altering properties of the Gulf blob, we now travel to the remote reaches of the South Pacific, where a geological formation defies conventional understanding and produces acoustic phenomena that blur the boundary between sound and something far more disturbing. This is the unsettling mystery of the Hunga Tonga Acoustic Anomaly, a place where the very rock beneath the seabed seems to sing with voices that no human should be able to hear, yet cannot forget once experienced. Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai is a submarine volcano located approximately 65 kilometers north of Tongatapu, the main island of the Kingdom of Tonga. For most of recorded history, it existed as a minor underwater volcanic feature, occasionally breaching the surface following major eruptions, only to be eroded back beneath the waves. In December 2014, a significant eruption created a new island connecting two previously separate volcanic cones, forming a more stable landmass that attracted scientific interest due to its unusual geological composition. The initial research expedition, led by Dr. Malia Tuifua of the University of the South Pacific, arrived in early 2015 to study the newly formed island as a rare opportunity to observe virgin land creation and ecological succession. No one expected this routine geological survey to uncover one of the ocean's most disturbing mysteries. The first indication that something was unusual came when the research vessel's sonar equipment began malfunctioning while mapping the underwater portions of the volcano. Rather than the expected acoustic reflection patterns, the system recorded what the technical operator described as structured reverberations. sound patterns that suggested the volcanic basalt was somehow reflecting and modulating the sonar pings in ways that normal rock shouldn't be capable of. Dr. Ryan Parker, the expedition's geophysicist, decided to employ more sophisticated acoustic mapping technology, using a multi-frequency approach to build a detailed profile of the underwater volcanic structure. The resulting data revealed something extraordinary. Portions of the basalt columns that formed the submarine foundation of the island appeared to be arranged in patterns that optimize sound transmission and modulation, creating what acoustic engineers would recognize as a naturally occurring waveguide structure. It was as if we were looking at a geological pipe organ, Dr. Parker later wrote in his personal research journal. The columnar basalt formations were aligned in precisely the arrangements that would maximize resonance at specific frequencies while dampening others. Natural processes can create columnar basalt, as seen at the Giant's Causeway in Ireland, but the mathematical precision of these formations and their acoustic properties suggest something beyond random geological processes. The discovery might have remained a curious geological anomaly if not for what happened when a storm system passed over the island on the expedition's 5th day. As wind and waves interacted with the partially submerged basalt columns, the research team began experiencing what they initially attributed to stress and fatigue. Auditory hallucinations of voices speaking in an unknown language, seemingly emerging from the water itself. Dr. Elena Kostadinova, the expedition's marine biologist, was the first to realize that these weren't hallucinations, but actual acoustic phenomena being generated by the interaction of water, wind, and the uniquely structured basalt formations. Using underwater microphones, she captured recordings of the sounds, complex, harmonically rich tones that oscillated within the infrasonic range, below 20 Hz, the lower threshold of human hearing, but with overtones that created perceivable patterns in the audible spectrum. When these recordings were later analyzed by linguistics experts, they noted disturbing similarities to human speech patterns, not in any recognizable language, but in the fundamental structural elements that define spoken communication, phonemic boundaries, rhythmic cadences, and semantic groupings. In essence, the basalt columns were speaking in a manner that human brains instinctively processed as language, despite being generated by ostensibly non-intelligent geological formations. The effects of prolonged exposure to these sounds proved to be the most concerning aspect of the discovery. Members of the research team who spent extended periods near the resonating columns reported increasingly vivid nightmares featuring identical imagery. Vast underwater structures resembling cities but with architecture designed for non-human inhabitants, entities described as moving shadows with too many limbs, and a recurring geometric symbol that several researchers found themselves compulsively drawing upon waking. By the 7th day of the expedition, 2 researchers were exhibiting symptoms of acute psychological distress, paranoia, visual hallucinations, and a fixation on returning to specific locations among the basalt columns. Dr. Tuifua made the decision to abort the expedition, concerned that the team's mental health was being compromised by some unknown factor associated with the acoustic phenomena. Upon returning to Tonga, all members of the expedition underwent comprehensive medical evaluation. Neurological scans revealed highly unusual patterns of activity in regions of the brain normally associated with language processing and spatial awareness. More concerning were the changes observed in the amygdala and hippocampus, brain structures linked to fear, response, and memory formation, which showed signs of physical restructuring after just 1 week of exposure to the acoustic anomaly. Dr. James Chen, a neurologist who examined several team members, provided a disturbing assessment. Whatever these sounds are doing, they're not simply being heard, they're physically reshaping how the brain processes information. The patterns we're seeing resemble those found in individuals who have undergone intensive linguistic reprogramming or certain types of brainwashing protocols, but achieved in days rather than the months or years such changes should require. While the research team recovered from their experience, a second, more concerning phenomenon began to manifest in the waters surrounding Hunga, Tonga. Local fishermen reported unprecedented changes in marine life behavior, including species appearing far outside their normal depth ranges and geographic distributions. Most alarming was the sudden presence of deep-sea creatures in the relatively shallow waters around the volcanic island. Specimens normally found only in abyssal trenches thousands of meters deep, including several species of anglerfish, giant isopods, and dragonfish were being observed or caught at depths of less than 100 meters, defying their known physiological limitations. These creatures, adapted for the crushing pressures of the deep ocean, should have experienced fatal barotrauma when ascending to such shallow depths, yet they appeared to be functioning normally. In February 2016, a more comprehensive multidisciplinary expedition was organized with appropriate psychological monitoring and protective measures against the acoustic effects. This team discovered that the unusual properties of the basalt columns extended far deeper than initially believed, forming a complex network of naturally resonating chambers that reached at least 800 meters below the seafloor, potentially connecting to the deeper magma chamber of the volcano itself. Using advanced imaging techniques, they mapped what appeared to be a vast system of tube-like structures within the volcanic edifice, formations that resembled enormous pipe organs or wind instruments, seemingly designed to produce specific sound frequencies when seawater flowed through them in response to tidal movements and geothermal convection. Dr. Hiroshi Takahashi, a geophysicist specializing in unusual volcanic formations, proposed a controversial theory after examining the data. These structures exhibit properties consistent with acoustic focusing technology, but on a scale and with a precision that exceeds current human engineering capabilities. The mathematical relationships between the dimensions of these tubes, their placement, and the resulting acoustic effects suggest deliberate design rather than random geological processes. The most disturbing discovery came when the team deployed autonomous underwater vehicles equipped with specialized audio recording equipment calibrated to capture the full range of infrasonic frequencies emanating from the deepest portions of the formation. When these recordings were analyzed and partially shifted into the audible spectrum, acoustic engineers identified patterns consistent with a communication system, rhythmic variations, frequency modulations, and structured repetitions that appeared to be carrying information rather than occurring randomly. Dr. Sofia Ramirez, a specialist in animal communication systems, made a chilling observation after analyzing these patterns. What we're hearing bears striking similarities to cetacean communication. Specifically, the more complex aspects of sperm whale codas and blue whale songs, but with mathematical precision and information density that exceeds anything observed in known animal communication. It's as if something is using a modified version of deep ocean bioacoustics to broadcast something. The content of this broadcast remains unknown, but its effects on marine life and human psychology continue to manifest in increasingly concerning ways. In July 2016, a fishing vessel that had been operating near Hunga, Tonga for several weeks was found drifting with its entire crew in a catatonic state. All 6 members fixated on identical drawings they had carved into the ship's wooden surfaces, intricate circular patterns with radial elements that mathematicians later identified as visual representations of specific wave functions. When these crew members eventually regained normal consciousness, they had no memory of creating the carvings but reported identical dreams of a city of sound beneath the ocean floor, and being guided through its chambers by entities they could feel but not see. Neurological examination revealed the same patterns of brain restructuring observed in the original research team, but more advanced, with significant new neural pathways formed in areas associated with spatial processing and nonverbal communication. By 2018, the waters within a 50-kilometer radius of Hunga, Tonga had been declared a restricted zone by international agreement, with official explanations citing geological instability and potential toxic gas emissions. Authorized research continues under strictly limited exposure protocols, with personnel rotated every 48 hours and required to wear specialized audio filtering equipment designed to block the specific frequency ranges identified as most psychologically affecting. The most recent development came in early 2020, when seismic monitoring stations throughout the Pacific detected a significant change in the acoustic output from Hunga, Tonga. The infrasonic emissions, previously localized around the immediate vicinity of the island, began propagating through the Pacific Basin via deep sound channels, naturally occurring oceanic layers that can carry certain sound frequencies for thousands of kilometers with minimal attenuation. This expanded acoustic range corresponded with widespread reports of unprecedented deep-sea creature migrations, with abyssal species being observed or captured at continental shelf depths across the South Pacific. More concerning, were the increasing incidence of whale strandings throughout the region, with necropsy examinations revealing unusual cranial trauma consistent with exposure to specific infrasonic frequencies at intensities that should not naturally occur outside deep ocean environments. Dr. Eleanor Vance, who now leads the classified research program monitoring the Hunga Tonga acoustic anomaly, offered this assessment in a confidential report obtained through undisclosed channels. We are observing what appears to be a coordinated acoustic event operating at scales beyond conventional understanding. The basalt formations are not simply resonating, they're broadcasting with increasing power and geographic reach. Whatever is generating these emissions has begun actively modifying the surrounding geological structures to amplify its signal. We cannot yet determine whether this represents a natural process we've never before encountered or something else entirely. The question of origin remains the most disturbing aspect of the Hunga Tonga mystery. If these acoustically perfect basalt formations are natural, they represent a mathematical improbability bordering on the impossible. If they are artificial, they suggest intervention by an intelligence with engineering capabilities far beyond current human technology, operating at depths and geological scales that defy conventional explanation. Most troubling is the growing evidence that these acoustic emissions may serve a purpose, not merely resonating by chance, but broadcasting specific information that systematically alters both marine life behavior and human neurological function. The precision with which these sounds target certain neural pathways suggests not random natural processes but directed communication with a clear objective. As one anonymous researcher noted in field notes later classified by their parent organization, the most unsettling possibility isn't that we're hearing something we don't understand. It's that something is speaking to us, reprogramming how we think and perceive, and we're only now realizing that a conversation has been underway for far longer than we know. The waters around Hunga Tonga continue to resonate with their eerie harmonies, drawing deep-sea creatures from the abyss and reshaping the minds of those who listen too long to frequencies that human ears were perhaps never meant to hear. Sounds that seem increasingly like voices calling from somewhere deep beneath the ocean floor, patiently waiting for a response. As we drift away from the resonating basalt columns of Hunga Tonga, our journey takes us into the cold, foggy waters of the North Sea, where another maritime mystery awaits. A phenomenon that doesn't speak through stone, but manifests as impenetrable darkness from which ships and their crews vanish without a trace. Story 17. The North Sea Black Fog Disappearances. From the resonating basalt columns of Hunga Tonga, we now sail northward to the cold gray waters of the North Sea, where a different kind of oceanic enigma has claimed dozens of vessels and hundreds of lives since the middle of the 20th century. This is the chilling mystery of what mariners call the Black Fog, a phenomenon that defies meteorological explanation and from which ships disappear without distress calls, without wreckage, and without survivors. Only a handful of witnesses have encountered this anomalous darkness and lived to describe the experience, and their accounts suggest something far more sinister than mere adverse weather. The North Sea, bounded by the coastlines of Britain, Scandinavia, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France, has always been one of the world's busiest and most dangerous waterways. Its shallow depth, powerful tidal currents, and frequent storms have claimed countless vessels throughout maritime history. Yet beginning in the early 1950s, a pattern of disappearances emerged that couldn't be explained by conventional hazards. The first documented encounter with the Black Fog occurred in October 1952, when the Danish freight vessel Jylland vanished while en route from Copenhagen to Newcastle. Weather conditions had been reported as favorable, with good visibility and calm seas. The ship's final routine radio check gave no indication of problems, yet it never arrived at its destination. The subsequent search operation found no debris, no oil slick, nothing to suggest what might have happened to the vessel and its crew of 14. The mystery might have been attributed to the usual maritime misfortunes, if not for what happened 3 weeks later. The fishing trawler East Wind, operating approximately 80 nautical miles from the Jylland's last known position, radioed an unusual weather report. Encountering abnormal fog condition, black in color, visibility 0, compass spinning, radio failing, something moving inside the transmission cut off abruptly. When the East Wind failed to return to port, another search was launched, but like the Jylland, the vessel had vanished completely. These two incidents might have remained isolated curiosities if not for the testimony of Wilhelm Schultz, captain of the German merchant vessel Bremen Star, who reported encountering a similar phenomenon in approximately the same region of the North Sea in April 1953. Unlike the previous vessels, the Bremen Star emerged from the experience, though forever changed. Captain Schultz's official statement, given to maritime authorities in Hamburg, described an encounter that defied conventional explanation. "We entered what appeared to be a typical North Sea fog bank around 1530. Standard procedure. Reduced speed, activated foghorn. But immediately we knew something was wrong. The fog was not gray, but absolutely black. Not dark, not deep gray, black, like sailing into an ink cloud. All visibility disappeared instantly. Then the instruments began to fail, compass spinning wildly, radio emitting only static. The temperature dropped at least 15 degrees within seconds. What followed, according to Schultz and the surviving crew members, was even more unsettling. The fog seemed to press against the ship. Not like normal weather, but as if it had weight and intention. Several crew members reported hearing voices whispering in languages they couldn't identify. Others claimed to see shapes moving within the blackness, forms that seemed vaguely human but elongated, distorted. Most disturbing was the distinct sensation that we were being watched, studied, from every direction simultaneously. The Bremen Star drifted powerless for approximately 40 minutes before the blackness suddenly dissipated, revealing clear skies and calm seas. When they regained their bearings, they discovered they had somehow traveled over 30 nautical miles from their previous position, a distance impossible to have covered in that time frame, even at full speed. More alarmingly, 5 crew members had vanished without trace, despite the vessel showing no signs of damage and all lifeboats remaining secured. "These men didn't fall overboard," Captain Schultz insisted. "They didn't leave the ship. They were in the secure areas of the vessel when we entered the black fog. When it cleared, they were simply gone, as if they had never existed. Yet their belongings remained, their documentation, even half-finished letters in their quarters. Something took them." The testimony might have been dismissed as the product of trauma, superstition, or even intoxication if not for the physical evidence. The Bremen Star's hull showed patterns of accelerated corrosion in perfect circular formations, as if some unknown force had selectively aged the metal in specific locations. Electrical systems throughout the vessel had been irreparably damaged in ways engineers could not explain, with wiring found melted inside intact insulation, a thermal impossibility under normal conditions. Most compelling was the ship's chronometer and the wristwatches of all surviving crew members, which had stopped at precisely the same moment, 1547, despite being different makes and models. When these timepieces were examined, watchmakers discovered their internal mechanisms had been altered at the molecular level, with crystalline structures formed within the metal components that shouldn't have been possible outside laboratory conditions. Following these incidents, maritime authorities dismissed the black fog as either exaggerated accounts of normal severe weather or, in the case of the Bremen Star, the result of crew exposure to unknown toxic gases that might have caused hallucinations and confusion. The official position was that the missing vessels had likely succumbed to conventional hazards, mechanical failure, human error, or rogue waves. This rationalization held until the 1960s, when a pattern became impossible to ignore. Between 1952 and 1968, a total of 17 vessels disappeared in a roughly circular region of the North Sea, centered approximately 120 nautical miles east of the Scottish coast. In each case, weather conditions had been reported as favorable before contact was lost, no distress signals were received, and no wreckage was ever recovered despite prompt and thorough search operations. More telling were the commonalities in the last communications from several of these vessels. 6 of them had reported encountering unusual fog conditions shortly before contact was lost. 4 specifically described the fog as black or unnaturally dark. 3 mentioned instrument failures, particularly compass malfunctions. And most disturbing, 2 different ships, the Norwegian tanker Oslo Fjord in 1964 and the British research vessel Challenger in 1967, transmitted nearly identical final messages referring to movement within the darkness and voices calling from the fog. The first scientific investigation of the phenomenon began in 1970, when Dr. Henrik Larsen of the Norwegian Meteorological Institute launched a dedicated study of what he termed anomalous, localized atmospheric opacity events in the North Sea. Using data from weather stations, ship reports, and early satellite imagery, Dr. Larson identified several distinctive characteristics that separated the black fog from conventional meteorological conditions. Number 1. The phenomenon formed with extraordinary rapidity, often appearing to coalesce from clear conditions within minutes rather than developing gradually like normal fog. Number 2. It maintained precise boundaries, with sharp delineations between the blackness and surrounding clear air, defying normal principles of atmospheric diffusion. Number 3. It moved independently of prevailing winds and weather systems, sometimes remaining stationary despite strong air currents or moving directly against established weather patterns. Number 4. Unlike normal fog, which reflects and scatters radar signals, the black fog appeared to absorb them completely, creating what radar operators described as perfect voids on their screens. Number 5. Most tellingly, the phenomenon exhibited what Dr. Larson cautiously termed apparent selective targeting behavior, seemingly changing direction to intercept specific vessels while bypassing others in the same general vicinity. Dr. Larson's research remained largely unknown outside specialized academic circles until 1973, when the passenger ferry Nordic Star encountered the black fog while carrying 112 passengers between Newcastle and Bergen. What made this incident historic was that it marked the first time the phenomenon had been photographed and its effects documented on multiple electronic recording devices. The Nordic Star's encounter lasted approximately 28 minutes, during which the ship lost all power and communications. Unlike previous vessels, the ferry carried emergency equipment with self-contained power sources, including a Super 8 film camera that the ship's first officer used to document the experience and backup systems designed to record navigational data independently of the main electrical systems. The footage, though grainy and severely degraded, showed something extraordinary. Within the blackness surrounding the ship, which appeared on film as an absolute absence of light rather than merely dark fog, multiple amorphous shapes could be seen moving with apparent purpose. More chilling were the audio recordings from the bridge, which captured not only the confused communications between crew members, but also what sound analysts later identified as whispered voices speaking backwards in multiple languages, including several that linguistics experts classified as unknown to modern scholarship. When the black fog dissipated, the Nordic Star found itself over 50 nautical miles from its previous position. All passengers and crew were accounted for, but many reported identical symptoms: temporary amnesia regarding events immediately before the encounter, vivid nightmares featuring what they described as figures watching from within darkness in the days following, and most notably, the recurring sensation of being followed or observed even weeks after the incident. The physical evidence was equally compelling. As with the Bremen Star 2 decades earlier, the Nordic Star showed inexplicable patterns of accelerated corrosion and molecular-level changes to metal components throughout the vessel. Most puzzling was the discovery that all photographic film on board, not just the Super 8 footage, but personal cameras belonging to passengers, showed the same distinct pattern of partial exposure that photo technicians described as consistent with exposure to radiation, despite radiation detectors on the vessel showing no unusual readings during the encounter. Following the Nordic Star incident, multiple nations with North Sea coastlines established dedicated monitoring programs to study the black fog phenomenon. The British Royal Navy, in particular, maintained a classified research operation from 1974 to 1986, using a combination of weather ships, radar installations, and specially equipped aircraft to track and document the fog's appearances. The data they collected revealed a disturbing progression. The phenomenon was becoming both more frequent and more geographically extensive, with sightings expanding beyond the original North Sea zone to include portions of the Norwegian Sea to the north and the English Channel to the south. More concerning was evidence suggesting that the black fog was becoming more discriminating in its selections, bypassing larger vessels to apparently target smaller ones, particularly those engaged in scientific research or carrying specialized equipment. Dr. Eleanor Wells, a meteorologist who worked on the British monitoring program, noted in a subsequently classified report, "Whatever this phenomenon is, it exhibits behaviors inconsistent with any known atmospheric process. The precision with which it navigates, its ability to maintain cohesion despite contrary wind conditions, and most troublingly, its apparent selection of specific vessels suggests either an unknown natural intelligence or a controlled mechanism beyond our current scientific understanding. Perhaps most unsettling were the testimonies collected from survivors of black fog encounters, particularly those who had been aboard vessels where other crew members vanished. A pattern emerged across these accounts, with witnesses consistently reporting hearing their names being called from within the darkness, often in the voices of family members or childhood friends. Several described feeling an almost overwhelming compulsion to walk into the fog, restrained only by the physical intervention of fellow crew members. Captain Lars Eriksson of the Swedish research vessel Vasa, which lost 3 crew members during a 1978 encounter, provided one of the most detailed first-hand accounts. The darkness doesn't just surround you, it watches you. You can feel attention focused on you, evaluating, selecting. Those who disappeared, they weren't taken randomly. In each case, they reported hearing something calling specifically to them, using details from their lives that nobody else aboard could have known. It was as if something had reached into their memories, found exactly what would draw them into the blackness, and used it as bait. By the mid-1980s, an international consensus formed around implementation of an early warning system and avoidance protocols for vessels operating in the North Sea. Using a network of radar installations, weather stations, and dedicated observer aircraft, authorities could often detect the formation of the black fog and issue emergency broadcasts, directing ships to avoid affected areas. These measures significantly reduced the number of disappearances, though incidents continued to occur when the fog formed with insufficient warning or when vessels were unable to maneuver clear in time. The most recent and perhaps most scientifically significant encounter occurred in 2014, when the Norwegian oceanographic research vessel Thor Heyerdahl inadvertently sailed into the periphery of a black fog formation approximately 85 nautical miles east of Aberdeen. Unlike previous vessels, the Thor Heyerdahl was equipped with state-of-the-art scientific instruments designed to study deep-sea environmental anomalies, including specialized sensors for detecting changes in electromagnetic fields, radiation levels, and quantum fluctuations. The data these instruments recorded during the ship's 17-minute exposure to the edge of the phenomenon, it managed to navigate clear before being fully engulfed, has forced a fundamental reassessment of what the black fog might represent. The readings showed what quantum physicists have termed localized reality distortion, areas where the normal laws of physics appeared to be partially suspended or operating according to alternative parameters. Dr. Akira Tanaka, a theoretical physicist who analyzed the Thor Heyerdahl data, proposed what remains the most comprehensive scientific theory about the black fog's nature. What these ships are encountering may be better understood not as a weather phenomenon, but as a temporary thinning of the boundaries between different states of reality. The fog appears black because it represents a space where the physics of our universe is being partially overwritten by different natural laws, creating a zone where light, matter, and even consciousness can transfer between normally separate domains of existence. This theory, while speculative, would explain many of the black fog's observed properties: its defined boundaries, its independence from normal weather patterns, the disappearances without trace, and the consistent reports of voices and entities perceived within the darkness. It suggests that the vanished ships and their crews haven't been destroyed, but transferred elsewhere, drawn through a temporary aperture between different layers of reality. Most concerning is the evidence indicating that these apertures are becoming more frequent and more persistent over time. The black fog was once a rare occurrence, with years sometimes passing between confirmed sightings. By 2020, monitoring stations were documenting an average of one formation every 6 weeks, with each event lasting longer than previous occurrences. The geographic range continues to expand as well, with confirmed sightings now reported as far north as the Barents Sea and as far south as the Bay of Biscay. What remains unknown is whether this increase represents a natural progression or a deliberate intensification. Are these breaches between realms occurring randomly, or is something actively creating them? And perhaps most disturbing, are the entities witnessed within the darkness merely passing visitors, or are they intentionally collecting human specimens for some unfathomable purpose? As one survivor from a 2018 encounter observed, the feeling you get inside the black fog isn't that you've encountered something alien. It's the horrible recognition that you're being welcomed home by something that knows you better than you know yourself. Whatever waits in that darkness has been watching us for a very long time, and it knows exactly who it wants to take. The North Sea continues to carry its regular traffic of commercial vessels, fishing boats, and passenger ferries, but those who sail these waters regularly maintain their own unofficial warning system, passing word of fog sightings through channels not monitored by official authorities. They know what the oceanographic charts don't show, that in certain regions of these cold northern waters, an unnatural darkness sometimes gathers, carrying within it voices that know your name and shapes that have been waiting a very long time to find you. As we navigate away from the watching darkness of the North Sea, our final destination awaits, a place where the ocean itself seems to harbor a vast mechanical intelligence, harvesting marine life with surgical precision, while emitting sounds that echo like the heartbeat of some enormous machine lurking in the Pacific depths. Story 18. The Pacific Machine Harvester. From the watching darkness of the North Sea, our final journey takes us to the vast expanses of the Central Pacific Ocean, where a phenomenon unlike any other challenges not just our understanding of marine biology and oceanography, but our very conception of what technology can exist beyond human creation. This is the deeply unsettling mystery of what researchers have reluctantly termed the Pacific Machine Harvester, a presence beneath the waves that systematically culls marine life with mechanical precision while emitting sounds that resemble massive industrial machinery in rhythmic operation. The story begins in 2006, when the oceanographic research vessel Horizon, operated by Scripps Institution of Oceanography, was conducting routine deepwater surveys approximately 1,200 nautical miles northeast of Hawaii. Using specialized hydrophones designed to monitor whale communications, the research team detected an unusual acoustic signature, a low-frequency rhythmic pulsing that principal investigator Dr. Miranda Chen initially assumed was distant ship traffic or undersea volcanic activity. What made this sound unique and increasingly concerning as analysis continued were its precise mathematical properties. Unlike natural phenomena or human vessels, which produce sounds with organic variations and fluctuations, this acoustic pattern maintained exact timing intervals, amplitude modulations, and frequency shifts that repeated with machine-like precision over periods lasting several hours. It wasn't random noise, and it wasn't biological in origin, Dr. Chen later wrote in her research notes. The pattern contained what sound engineers would recognize as gear ratios, specific mathematical relationships between different parts of the acoustic signature that suggest rotating machinery with interlocking components. Except the scale was all wrong. Based on our acoustic propagation models, whatever was generating these sounds would need to be massive, perhaps hundreds of meters in diameter, and operating at depths where human machinery simply cannot function. The Horizon altered course to investigate the source directly, but as they approached the estimated origin point, the sounds ceased. What they discovered instead was something that would set in motion years of classified research and increasing concern among those few scientists privy to the full findings. Scattered across an area of approximately 12 square kilometers were the remains of marine life, not in the scattered, partially decomposed state normally associated with natural die-offs, but organized into distinct groupings of specific species, each displaying identical and precisely placed incisions that marine biologists on the expedition described as surgical in nature and executed with mechanical precision. The most disturbing aspect was the nature of these incisions. Dr. Robert Jacobson, the expedition's marine biologist, documented the findings. Each specimen, regardless of species or size, displayed 3 precise cuts arranged in a triangular pattern. The edges of these incisions showed no signs of tearing or crushing that would be consistent with animal predation. Instead, they appeared laser-precise, as if made with an extremely sharp blade or cutting tool. Most notably, specific internal organs had been removed from each specimen, while the remainder of the organism was left intact. Analysis of the tissue samples revealed another anomaly. The cellular structures at the edges of the incisions showed signs of flash cauterization, a process that instantly seals and sterilizes tissue through intense, precisely applied heat. This technology exists in advanced medical facilities, but requires sophisticated equipment and controlled environments. The idea that such precise work had been performed on thousands of specimens in the open ocean, at various depths, defied conventional explanation. When these findings were reported to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA, they prompted the establishment of a dedicated research initiative operating under the innocuous name Pacific Acoustic Monitoring Program, or PAMP. Using a network of deep-water hydrophones and autonomous underwater vehicles, this program began systematically tracking the mysterious sounds and their apparent relationship to the precisely harvested marine remains. A pattern quickly emerged. The acoustic signatures, which researchers now called processing cycles, occurred at irregular intervals throughout the North Pacific, each lasting between 4 and 6 hours. Within 48 hours of each acoustic event, extensive marine die-offs would be discovered in the same general area, always displaying the same triangular incision pattern and selective organ removal. Most concerning was the progressive expansion of these events. In 2007, PAMP documented 8 separate processing cycles. By 2010, that number had increased to 27. By 2015, hydrophones were detecting an average of 1 event per week, with an ever-expanding geographic range that had grown to encompass much of the North Pacific between Japan and California. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who joined the research program in 2012, contributed a disturbing observation after analyzing years of accumulated data. Whatever is generating these sounds and harvesting marine life isn't static, it's learning, adapting, and expanding. Each processing cycle shows subtle refinements in efficiency, with more specimens processed in less time. The precision of the incisions has increased by approximately 0.08 millimeters per year, a small change that nonetheless suggests ongoing technical improvement rather than a natural process. In 2016, the research vessel Oceanus, specially equipped to investigate the phenomenon, managed to arrive at a processing site while acoustic signals were still active. What the ship's crew encountered defies easy explanation and has since become one of the most closely guarded secrets in oceanographic research. Captain Michael Wong's classified report, later leaked by a former crew member, described what the ship's sonar and underwater cameras detected, approximately 800 meters below the surface. We observed what initially appeared to be a large, organized school of marine life. As our instruments resolved the image, it became clear we were observing something mechanical, or at least partly mechanical in nature. The formation consisted of what looked like hundreds of identical objects moving in perfect coordination, forming constantly shifting geometric patterns, while maintaining a central structure approximately 120 meters in diameter. When the ship deployed a remote-operated vehicle, also called an ROV, equipped with high-definition cameras to investigate more closely, the objects, which the crew had begun referring to as units, responded immediately. The central formation dispersed, with individual units rapidly ascending toward the ROV. The last images transmitted before the camera feed was lost showed what appeared to be metallic objects approximately 2 meters in length, with multiple articulating appendages and a triangular central housing. The ROV itself was never recovered. When it was winched back to the surface, only the severed cable remained, showing the same precision cutting pattern observed in the harvested marine specimens. More disturbing was the discovery that the Oceanus itself had been marked, 3 small triangular holes, each approximately 1 centimeter in diameter, had been precisely drilled through the ship's hull below the waterline. These perforations had been sealed with an unknown substance that metallurgical analysis later identified as containing elements not found on the periodic table. Following this encounter, the research program was transferred from NOAA to the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, known as DARPA, and most data was classified. However, independent researchers continued to monitor unusual marine die-offs and acoustic anomalies across the Pacific, assembling a partial picture of an increasingly concerning situation. Dr. James Chen, a marine biologist who has studied the phenomenon independently, published a carefully worded paper in 2019 that avoided direct reference to classified information while highlighting the pattern of precision-harvested marine organisms. What we are observing appears to be a systematic sampling program targeting specific biological structures across a wide range of marine species. The consistency of the extraction pattern suggests a single purpose: the collection of particular cellular structures and biochemical compounds that serve some specific function for the collector. Most concerning is Dr. Chen's observation regarding the progression of harvested species. Initial events focused primarily on fish and cephalopods. By 2015, the harvesting had expanded to include marine mammals, particularly dolphins and small whales. Since 2018, there have been at least 17 documented cases of great whales, blue whales, fin whales, and sperm whales, found with the distinctive triangular incision pattern and specific organs removed with surgical precision. The nature of the technology involved remains perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the mystery. No known human organization possesses underwater machinery capable of operating at the depths, scale, and precision observed. The coordinated movement patterns of the units witnessed by the Oceanus crew suggest either advanced autonomous drones or a networked intelligence controlling multiple mechanical elements as a single entity. In 2021, a major development occurred when a damaged unit was recovered by a Japanese fishing vessel approximately 400 miles east of Hokkaido. The object, approximately 1.8 meters in length, was described as resembling a metallic manta ray with multiple articulated appendages and a central triangular housing. Before government authorities could secure the object, the fishing crew documented it extensively with photographs and video, which quickly spread online, despite efforts to suppress the material. What these images revealed was technology unlike anything publicly known. The object appeared to be composed of a metal-like material with unusual properties, a surface that seemed to flow and reconfigure itself, healing visible damage even as the crew observed it. No seams, screws, welding points, or other conventional manufacturing indicators were visible anywhere on its surface. Most notably, the object contained no recognizable power source, propulsion system, or control mechanisms that would be expected in human-designed underwater craft. When the damaged unit was finally secured by Japanese maritime authorities, it reportedly initiated what witnesses described as a self-destruct sequence, rapidly heating to temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius and effectively vaporizing much of its own structure, leaving behind only fragments for analysis. These fragments contained alloys and molecular structures that metallurgists and materials scientists could not replicate or sometimes even identify using current technology. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, who examined these fragments before they were classified, offered this assessment. What we observed was not simply advanced technology. It was technology operating on principles that fundamentally differ from human engineering paradigms. The material appeared to blur the conventional boundaries between mechanical and biological systems, suggesting a technological approach that evolved along entirely different lines than human development. The acoustic signature of the Pacific Machine Harvester continues to be detected with increasing frequency across the North Pacific. In 2022, monitoring stations recorded over 300 separate processing cycles, nearly one per day, with the geographic range now extending into portions of the South Pacific and, most recently, the Indian Ocean. The selective harvesting of marine life has also evolved in concerning ways. Analysis of recent specimens shows the triangular incision pattern has been modified to include a fourth cut, forming a tetrahedron rather than a triangle. More troubling is evidence suggesting that the harvesting now targets not just specific organs, but also neural tissue, particularly brain structures associated with complex information processing in higher mammals. Dr. Sarah Reynolds, a neurobiologist who has studied these patterns, offered a disturbing theory regarding this evolution. What we may be witnessing is a systematic mapping of nervous system development across marine species, a progressive study of increasingly complex neural structures that appears to be building towards something. The precision and methodical nature of these extractions suggests not random sampling but a deliberate research program with specific objectives. The question of origin remains the most profound aspect of the mystery. Three main theories have emerged among those researchers aware of the full scope of the phenomenon. The first suggests the technology may be terrestrial but non-human in origin, perhaps developed by an oceanic civilization that evolved independently from surface-dwelling humanity, following a completely different technological evolution path in the isolation of the deep ocean. The second proposes an extraterrestrial source, not necessarily aliens themselves, but autonomous collection systems designed to sample and catalog Earth's biosphere, operating independently for extended periods while sending data back to their point of origin. The third, and perhaps most unsettling theory, suggests the technology may be human in origin, but from either the distant future or an alternative timeline. Self-replicating machines designed for oceanic resource management that have either malfunctioned or are operating exactly as intended, but in ways their creators did not anticipate or cannot control. Whatever the truth, the implications grow more concerning as the phenomenon expands. The Pacific Machine Harvester, if indeed it is a single entity rather than many, appears to be studying Earth's marine life with increasing focus on neural complexity, gradually working its way up the evolutionary chain while refining its harvesting techniques and expanding its operational range. Most troubling are recent acoustic analyses suggesting evolution in the sound patterns themselves. What began as mechanical rhythms that simply resembled industrial machinery has gradually transformed into something more complex. The latest recordings contain structures that mathematical linguists have identified as potentially carrying encoded information, patterns too regular to be random noise, but organized according to principles that don't match any human communication system. Dr. Elena Vasquez, in her final report before the entire research program was classified beyond even academic access, wrote, "What began as a mysterious acoustic signature and precision harvesting pattern has evolved into something that increasingly resembles a vast distributed intelligence conducting systematic research across Earth's oceans. The question is no longer whether we are observing an unknown technology, but whether that technology is observing us, studying not just marine life, but human reactions to its presence, perhaps preparing for some form of contact or escalation that we can scarcely imagine." As ships continue to cross the Pacific, hydrophones throughout the ocean basin detect the steady, rhythmic pulses of something vast and mechanical moving methodically through the deep waters. Marine creatures are found with precise incisions and missing organs, their bodies neatly arranged in geometric patterns on the seabed. And with each passing year, the sounds grow louder, more complex, and more widely distributed, the working components of some enormous machine intelligence that humans neither built nor control, harvesting the oceans for purposes we have yet to comprehend. Our journey through the most disturbing unsolved ocean mysteries now concludes, having taken us from ghost ships to vanishing crews, from reality-bending whirlpools to mind-altering bacteria, from the blood-red waters of Angola to the mechanized harvesters of the Pacific. The ocean, covering more than 70% of our planet's surface, and with depths largely unexplored, remains humanity's great unknown frontier, a realm where science and mystery coexist, where the boundaries of our understanding are constantly challenged, and where things beyond conventional explanation continue to lurk in the darkness beneath the waves. What other enigmas might be waiting to be discovered in the vast blue depths? What truths might be hiding just beyond the reach of our most advanced technology? And how many ships, planes, and people have vanished into oceanic mysteries that no one lived to report? The sea keeps its secrets well, but occasionally allows us glimpses of realities far stranger than fiction, reminders that for all our technological advancement and scientific knowledge, the waters that cover most of our world still harbor enigmas that defy explanation, and mysteries that may never be solved.